Chapter 36:23. This represented the supreme power of the entire Eastern Territory. In addition to Yi Shiwen, everyone else naturally understood what the seal represented. This meant that in the Eastern Territory, Yi Shiwen had truly become the supreme. Even those peak heavenly masters could not compete with Yi Shiwen. This was the majesty of the great masters. Yi Shiwen belonged to the younger generation among the great masters. However, an ordinary celestial master couldn't compare with him. With the return of the Eastern Heavenly Venerate, Yi Shiwen's status in the Eastern Territory was absolute. Yi Shiwen officially succeeded the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate and entered the Eastern Heavenly Venerate Mansion. With his order, the Eastern Heavenly Venerate Mansion began to hold all kinds of celebrations. The news of Yi Shiwen succeeding the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate spread throughout the Eastern Territory and even the Fortune God Dynasty. As one of the Fortune Divine Dynasty's great masters, the Eastern Heavenly Venerate ruled over the vast Eastern region. Needless to say, the Eastern Heavenly Venerate status was very important. Many experts from various regions were already waiting outside the Eastern Heavenly Venerate Manor for news. After Yi Shiwen had successfully defeated Space-Time Heavenly Master, they understood that this result couldn't be changed. Although they were extremely shocked in their hearts and didn't understand why Wu Zun had won instead of Space-Time Heavenly Master, who was more favored by everyone, they quickly brought back all kinds of news to the various regions. Subsequently, the special envoys of the Eastern Heavenly Venerate Mansion also set off to various territories to announce the news of Yi Shiwen succeeding the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate to the world. The Fortune God Dynasty was too vast. If it was not artificially announced, even if the leaders of the various forces were very clear about it, it would take a long time for the news to spread throughout the Fortune God Dynasty. Even in the Eastern Territory, it would take a long time for the name of Eastern Heavenly Venerate to spread throughout the Fortune God Dynasty. Overnight, the news of Yi Shiwen succeeding the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate spread throughout the Fortune God Dynasty. For a time, the entire Fortune God Dynasty was in an uproar. Before the election began, except for some die-hard supporters of Yi Shiwen in the Eastern Territory, almost everyone was looking at Space-Time Heavenly Venerate. Compared to Yi Shiwen, Space-Time Heavenly Venerate had too many advantages. That advantage was not something that Yi Shiwen could reverse. However, when the truth came out, everyone felt like they had been slapped hard in the face. This slap made them see stars. How is this possible? The Space-Time Heavenly Lord has dominated the world for so many years. How could he be overthrown by a martial venerable? What happened? Could there have been an accident? How did Wu Zun do it? Many people doubted whether Yi Shiwen was lucky or had used some tricks. However, only those emperors and celestial masters who had personally witnessed the scene would understand that Yi Shiwen had not won by luck. He had indeed defeated Space-Time Celestial Master with absolute strength. He had even defeated Space-Time Empyrean at a lower cultivation level. No one had anything to say about such a victory because there was nothing they could say. Many people were asking in their hearts, how could this be? How could this be? However, it didn't matter whether they liked it or not. It was an unchangeable fact that Yi Shiwen had become the Eastern Celestial Lord. And this wind blew directly to the outer domain, causing an uproar in the outer domain. As neighbors of the Fortune God Dynasty, and there had been many years of conflict between them, the outer domain would only pay more attention to the replacement of the heavenly masters in the Fortune God Dynasty than the Fortune God Dynasty itself. This was because every supremacy had a different personality, which also meant that their actions would be different. It was necessary to prepare as soon as possible. In particular, the Tempest Sea region, which was directly adjacent to the Eastern Domain, was paying close attention to the selection. When the news spread to the Tempest Sea region, all the emperors and heavenly masters of the outer domain looked at each other in dismay. They were a little dumbfounded. Like the masses of the Fortune God Dynasty, They also felt that although Yi Shiwen was strong, it was not his era. Yi Shiwen had defeated the Tempest Sea region's army and killed many of their heavenly masters, causing the entire Tempest Sea region to suffer heavy losses. But that was only under special circumstances, especially when their peak heavenly masters were held up. If not for that, Yi Shiwen would really be dead. Moreover, the eruption of such a trump card obviously could not last long, and one had to pay an extremely heavy price. Yi Shiwen almost couldn't hold on in the end was proof of that. Therefore, in their opinion, the possibility of space-time Heavenly Master winning in the end was very high. During the many years when space-time Heavenly Master ruled the central domain, he had also rushed to the other domains many times. Therefore, the experts of the Tempest Sea region were no strangers to space-time Heavenly Master. They knew that he was a very difficult opponent to deal with, but they didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would win in the end. This made them dumbfounded. When they received the news, they couldn't believe it. What kind of ability did Yi Shiwen have to defeat space-time Heavenly Master? Could it be that the trump card that he had displayed before had erupted? They couldn't believe it, but regardless of whether they were willing to believe it or not, it had already become a fact. As the supreme ruler of the Eastern Domain, his character and way of doing things were inevitably closely related to the Tempest Sea region. In particular, this time, the foreign domain was extremely daring. They had actually launched a surprise attack on the Fortune God dynasty and plundered countless wealth of the Fortune God dynasty, severely injuring the Fortune God dynasty. With the Fortune God dynasty's way of doing things, it was hard to say whether or not they would retaliate. Although there was also news from the epic battlefield that the Fortune God dynasty had suffered heavy losses in the epic battlefield. Coupled with the previous attack from the foreign domain, it could be said that the Fortune God dynasty had suffered heavy losses. But even if there was only a small possibility, they had to guard against it. The news was still spreading. Everywhere it reached, it inevitably set off an uproar. Many people didn't think that Yi Shiwen would eventually ascend to the position of the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master, especially the common tyrants under the rule of the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master. At this time, they didn't know what to think. They watched helplessly as the human race, which was originally inferior to them, soared to the sky and became the race that dominated the Eastern Domain. As long as Yi Shiwen was the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master, no one could shake the position of the human race. The celebration of Yi Shiwen's ascension to the position of Eastern Domain Heavenly Master lasted for 10 days and 10 nights. All kinds of banquets were held. Toasts were exchanged and toasts were exchanged. However, no matter how long the celebration was, it still had a time limit. 10 days and 10 nights sounded long, but in fact it passed very quickly. The holy masters and emperors left one after another and returned to their respective posts. This time, Yi Shiwen's strong counterattack and defeat of space-time Heavenly Master brought shock to them. The subsequent series of changes that followed were not something that could be digested in a short time. They needed time to calm down. In particular, many holy masters were very optimistic about space-time Heavenly Master from the beginning. They also bet their treasures on him and supported him a lot. However, now that Yi Shiwen had become the new Eastern Domain Heavenly Master, they had to be careful. If Yi Shiwen wanted to settle the score after the fall, then things would be troublesome. If the position of the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master wanted to make things difficult for them, naturally there would be a way. This grand ceremony could be said to be a happy occasion for some people and a sad occasion for some people. Those who stood on Yi Shiwen's side naturally cheered heartily. However, the emperors and holy masters who stood on the opposite side of Yi Shiwen knew how the dishes and wine tasted. Yi Shiwen didn't know what these emperors and holy masters were thinking, but it didn't mean that he couldn't guess. It was nothing more than more people were optimistic about space-time Heavenly Master, so they went to make friends in advance. On the other hand, not many people were optimistic about Yi Shiwen. Among the trillions of creatures in the entire Eastern region, Yi Shiwen's prestige was naturally very high. However, among these celestial masters and emperors, Yishuin's prestige was obviously not enough. Otherwise, they would not have chosen to support Space-Time, Celestial Master. These could not be rushed in a short time. It needed to be managed slowly. After the ceremony ended, the great Holy Masters also left. Only the Middle Holy Master stayed because the Middle Holy Master was originally the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master. Now that he was promoted to the Middle Holy Master, there was naturally a lot of work to be handed over. It should be said that it was handed over to Bian Xiaoye and other loyal subordinates of Yishuin to unify the entire vast and boundless land of the Eastern region. It was still beyond the power of the human clan, even with Yishuin's suppression. Fortunately, the previous Eastern Domain Heavenly Masters had their own subordinates. The current Middle Holy Master was not the first Eastern Domain Heavenly Master, and naturally would not be the last Eastern Domain Heavenly Master. It was simply impossible for the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master to unify it alone. There were always some powerful clans and great sects that were loyal to the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master for generations. It should be said that they were loyal to whoever was the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master. They were not loyal to anyone, but they were loyal to the person sitting in that position. They could be trusted. They were also the courtiers of the Eastern region. Together with the Heavenly Taoism, the Silver Moon Clan, and other powerful sects and clans, they formed the ruling class of the entire Eastern region. They were also a sharp blade in the hands of the previous Eastern Domain Heavenly Masters. They could directly mobilize the power that belonged to the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master. After all, the tyrants among the people were not necessarily obedient, and they were not easy to control. It was impossible without the assistance of these people. Although the human clan was loyal and devoted, their strength was not worth mentioning compared to the entire Eastern region. They could only occupy the most core position, and it was impossible to manage everything. This was also the strategy of the previous Eastern Domain Heavenly Masters. As long as they occupied the righteous title of the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master, no one dared to disobey their orders. Moreover, the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master Mansion was backed by the Fortune God dynasty. Going against the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master Mansion was going against the Fortune God dynasty, and the consequences would be much more serious. At this point, although it could not be said that the entire Eastern region was like the back of his hand, it was generally under the firm control of the Eastern Domain Heavenly Master. Chapter 36:24. None of the previous Eastern Venerables wanted to control everything in their hands. Firstly, it was unrealistic. Secondly, it was too much of a waste of time. Not many of them wanted to become Eastern Venerables because they had a strong desire for power. Eastern Venerables were just stepping stones for them to advance further in their cultivation. To put it bluntly, this was an aid to cultivation, not the main goal. During the handover period, the Middle Venerables would also stay in the Eastern Venerables Mansion and let their subordinates handle the handover with the human clan. Although many people in the Eastern Venerables Mansion were loyal to the Eastern Venerables for generations and did not need to be replaced, some key points must be controlled by the human clan, including the core of the defensive formation, nodes, vaults, boundaries, and so on. The most critical places must be controlled by the trusted subordinates of the Eastern Venerables. After Yishuin began to take over the work of the Eastern Venerables, he discovered that a lot of things and work had accumulated during this period of time. As the Eastern Venerables, ordinary things naturally did not need to be handled by him. However, now that the Eastern region had experienced the invasion of the Stormy Sea region, there was a lot of mess left that needed him to solve and mediate. This was especially true for places that had once been ravaged by the Stormy Sea region. Those tribes that had been wiped out and the remnants of the great sects came to the Eastern Empyrean Manor to weep and beg for a place to stay. There were also those tribes that had surrendered to the Stormy Sea region. And in the vast expanses of empty land that these people had vacated, there were many pairs of eyes staring at them covetously. Those veteran Empyreans attacked one after another, even fighting each other in order to seize territory. For the land of a large province, they could fight to the death. The eastern region, which had just retreated from the Stormy Sea region, was filled with smoke and undercurrents. Some of the veteran Celestial Venerables who had snatched territories reported to the Eastern Venerables Mansion and asked for them to recognize their sovereignty over the land. The veteran Celestial Venerables who had not snatched territories asked for the Eastern Venerables Mansion to make decisions for them. These things happened one after another, wave after wave. It was just that the Middle Heavenly Venerate had been in charge of the Central region, and the Eastern Heavenly Venerate hadn't returned yet, so this matter had been suppressed first. However, all of these things had suddenly broken out, and Yishuin had to deal with it. Compared to these matters, the rest of the matters were just trivial matters, annihilating the rebellious tribes and sects, pacifying and settling the remnants of the tribes and sects that had fought to the death for the Fortune Divine Dynasty. All of these matters were handed over to Bien Xiaoya, Heaven-Shaking Thunder Emperor, and the others to handle. In particular, Bien Xiaoyu was the person whom he had focused on training. Although it was somewhat difficult for him to deal with these matters with his strength, Bien Xiaoyu was carrying Yi Shiwen's name. Who would dare to not give him face? That would be equivalent to not giving Yi Shiwen face. That would simply be courting death. This was an excellent training opportunity for him, and the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor was there to support her. If there was something that even she couldn't handle, the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor would personally handle it. For example, some rebellious tribes and sects had powerful emperor lords overseeing them. These were things that Bien Xiaoya couldn't handle in a short time, so the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor would personally lead a team to annihilate them. In addition, there were many courtiers in the Eastern Venerables Mansion who were directly under the command of the Eastern Venerables. They had been loyal to the Eastern Venerables for countless years, and it was deeply ingrained in their blood. As long as the Eastern Venerables gave the order, they would do their best. Now, in order to leave a good impression in front of the new Eastern Venerables, these people began to work hard and listen to Bien Xiaoya's orders. There were even heavenly venerables among them. When necessary, they would personally take action to annihilate the rebellious tribes. Therefore, it wasn't that difficult. The main thing was that there were many and complicated things, so Yi Shiwen couldn't be bothered to solve them. Just the matters of those veteran, heavenly venerables were enough to give him a headache. The memorials of those veteran, heavenly venerables were more polite than the previous one. However, the requests in the memorials were more difficult than the previous one. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but feel annoyed. These old guys were usually more cunning than the previous one. They often didn't listen to the Eastern Venerables Mansion's requests. At this time, they were acting as if they had been loyal to the Eastern Venerables Mansion for many years. In the end, it was because they wanted to obtain the approval of the Eastern Venerables Mansion. The Eastern Venerables Mansion represented the Fortune God Dynasty. Only by obtaining the approval of the Fortune God Dynasty could they occupy the territories that they had seized for a long time. Otherwise, as long as the Fortune God Dynasty gave the order, they would be attacked from all sides. They could snatch other people's territories, and conversely, others could also snatch their territories. It wasn't difficult at all. The initiator would never have a successor. Just like how the human race had previously seized the heaven-devouring demon tribes' provinces, they also needed the approval of the Eastern Venerables Mansion. It was precisely because of this that Yi Shiwen made the decision to side with the Eastern Venerables Mansion. Otherwise, if he didn't obtain the approval of the Eastern Venerables Mansion, the human race could be said to be besieged on all sides. There was a possibility that the human race could be exterminated at any time. Even if he had entered the Heavenly Venerables realm, he wouldn't be able to stop the Heavenly Venerables of the other races. It was precisely because they had a favor to ask of him that these arrogant old fellows all lowered their heads and spoke humbly to him. However, these veteran Heavenly Venerables were different from ordinary Emperor Lords. He couldn't deal with them casually. It wasn't until he became the Eastern Venerables that Yi Shiwen discovered that the position of the Eastern Venerables wasn't that easy. Without absolute strength and prestige, it was difficult to carry out many things. If he hadn't had the amazing battle record of defeating the Stormy Sea Region army by himself, his prestige might not have been as high as it was now. In particular, many veteran Heavenly Venerables simply looked down on Yi Shiwen's strength. Even with the Eastern Venerable's seal, Yi Shiwen possessed absolute combat power. However, his true realm was only the 7th realm. Among these old guys, there were many experts in the 7th realm, 8th realm, and even 9th realm. Many of these veteran Heavenly Venerates had already been running amok during the reign of the previous Eastern Heavenly Venerate and the Eastern Heavenly Venerate before that. Making them obediently listen to the words of a junior wasn't something that could be done with ordinary means. This made Yi Shiwen ponder over this painful experience. He had to find a way to improve his strength, especially to the 8th realm. Once he reached the 8th realm, he would even dare to challenge the 9th realm Heavenly Venerables. At that time, even without the Eastern Venerable seal, no one would dare to underestimate him. In the end, in this world, only strength could determine everything. And these Heavenly Venerables, whether it was joining the Fortune Divine Dynasty or going their own way, or competing for territories, in the end, it was all for the sake of strengthening themselves. While Yi Shiwen was having a headache over these matters, the Middle Heavenly Venerables unexpectedly came to visit. There was a half-bit wall in the depths of the Eastern Venerable's mansion. It was a space that Yi Shiwen had opened up himself. There were birds and flowers everywhere and forests crisscrossed. On a mountainside, 2 figures were sitting cross-legged in midair. 2 cloud beds were supporting them. At this time, there was no one else. Only Sun Diandian was accompanying them. She would pour tea for them from time to time. This was also Yi Shiwen's intention to nurture her. She also knew the importance of this matter. Although her cultivation had improved tremendously during this period of time, and she had directly advanced to the deity realm, she was no different from an ant compared to the 2 masters of the Fortune God dynasty and even the entire martial arts era. It seems that you have been quite busy during this period of time. The Middle Heavenly Venerables looked at Yi Shiwen and couldn't help but smile. The relationship between the 2 was very close, and they had fought side by side many times. Naturally, there was no need for pleasantries. He couldn't help but look at Yi Shiwen with astonishment. Although Yi Shiwen was recommended by him, he didn't have a better candidate in his pocket at that time. He mainly recommended Heavenly Venerables, Silver Moon, and Yi Shiwen was more like a casual recommendation. But no one expected that under the strength of space-time Heavenly Venerables, everyone else had lost the qualifications to run for the position. Instead, Yi Shiwen counterattacked and successfully defeated space-time Heavenly Venerables to become the Eastern Venerables. This was something that he hadn't expected at the beginning. Yi Shiwen frowned slightly. He picked up the teacup, took a sip of the immortal tea, and said, "Things are much more complicated than I thought, and also much more troublesome." The Middle Heavenly Venerables couldn't help but shake his head and laugh when he saw Yi Shiwen's frown. He remembered that he was also very busy during this period of time. He was going to take over as the Middle Heavenly Venerables, and the things he had to do were no less than Yi Shiwen's. Especially among the major regions, the Central region was obviously the strongest. It could faintly suppress the other regions, and the tyrants in the Central region were far more than the tyrants in the Eastern region. Although he had been the Eastern Venerables for many years and entered the Central region with supreme merits, things couldn't really be smooth sailing. There were also many people who didn't buy into his account. Although they didn't dare to say anything on the surface, there were many who resisted in private. This situation was something that the Supreme Venerables of each region had to face. Unless the Fate Creation Heaven Lord was resurrected, who else could have the prestige to make the tyrants of each region obediently bow their heads? The Eastern region is fine. You have recently made great contributions to the Eastern region, so they don't dare to refute you on the surface, said the Middle Heavenly Venerables. Besides, do you think that those old guys are more domineering now? Let me tell you, when I first inherited the position, they were 10 times more domineering than they are now. Now that they have been tortured by the fate creation path for many years, they have restrained themselves a lot. Yi Shiwen looked at the middle heavenly venerables. He could roughly imagine how domineering those old guys were in the past. It was the era when the fate creation heaven lord had just disappeared, and the entire fortune god dynasty was at its strongest. There were many talents and heroes gathered. They fought against the foreign regions internally and the ancient era externally. They were insufferably arrogant. It was really difficult to take over as the Eastern Venerables at that time. Chapter 36:25. The old heavenly masters who challenged Yi Shiwen in the Eastern region were no longer at their peak. They could not be compared to their peak. At that time, the fortune god dynasty was truly at its peak. There were many experts and fierce generals. At that time, it was not so easy to become a true ruler. However, the middle heavenly master eventually succeeded in subduing the eastern region. This was enough to show how capable the middle heavenly master was. You don't have to worry about the ordinary emperor's matters. I can probably guess that those old guys are fighting for territory, said the middle heavenly master with a smile. Indeed, these people often come in groups of 2 or 3 at the same time to declare ownership of the same area. Now it's not given to anyone, said Yi Shiwen as he rubbed his forehead. For him, this was the biggest headache. What advice do you have? Asked Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen said, this wasn't the first time he had become a sovereign lord. He was already invincible when he was in the myriad worlds of the heavens. However, the situation in the eastern region was 1,000 times, 10,000 times more complicated than the myriad heavens. It's not advice. I just have more experience than you, said the middle heavenly master. The middle celestial master said, you can't refuse all of the requests of these old fellows, but you can't satisfy them either. Otherwise, they will inevitably want more. Take half of the empty provinces under the direct jurisdiction of the Eastern Heavenly Mansion. Move in the tribes and sects that belong to the Eastern Heavenly Mansion. The other half will be divided according to the strength of those old guys, said the middle heavenly master. Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up when he heard the middle heavenly master's words. Indeed, this was a very good idea. Take half of the provinces under the direct jurisdiction of the Eastern Heavenly Mansion. In this case, the strength of the Eastern Heavenly Mansion's direct descendants could be improved a lot. In the past, the fortune god dynasty did not have such a concept. Everything under the sky belonged to the king, and everyone under the sky belonged to the king. However, after the fortune god lord disappeared, the independent tendencies of these local tyrants gradually emerged. This was the difference between the direct jurisdiction of the Eastern Heavenly Mansion and the local tyrants. For him to control the Eastern Heavenly Mansion, the more provinces he controlled, the better. That way his strength would be stronger, and his right to speak would be greater. It was just that, if they wanted to swallow up all of the empty continents, that would be far too unsightly. But swallowing up half was naturally a result that both sides could accept. This would satisfy a portion of the demands of those veteran Empyreans. But at the same time, it wouldn't be completely satisfied. This would increase their appetites. Moreover, Yi Shiwen could also bestow those big prefectures under the direct jurisdiction of the Eastern Deity Mansion to the human race, and let the human race migrate there. Who could say anything about this? As the Eastern Deity Mansion, he would certainly take care of his own people as long as it wasn't too excessive. This was also one of the unspoken rules that everyone tacitly agreed upon. This matter is troublesome for you, but it is also an opportunity. I didn't have such an opportunity in the past, said the middle heavenly master. The entire Eastern region and the Fortune Divine Dynasty are intertwined with various forces, and they are intertwined with one another. It's not appropriate to touch any one of them, much less wipe out an entire province. Although the foreign domains invasion this time has exhausted the Fortune Divine Dynasty's overall strength, it is an opportunity for them to strengthen the Fortune Divine Dynasty's direct subordinate forces. Yi Shiwen nodded. This was also true. Although it was a headache and a mess, it was also a good opportunity to strengthen themselves if it was handled well. The initiative of the whole matter was in his hands. A group of people were waiting to be enfeoffed, but it was his right to decide who to give it to. So what if those people fought for territory? In the end, they still had to obtain his recognition. His position in the Eastern Domain was supreme. He represented the heavens and was recognized by the heavenly Tao. Who could go against him? As the Eastern Heavenly Master, he held righteousness in his hands. With righteousness in his hands, anyone who resisted would be a heaven-defying act. In terms of who had the biggest card in his hands, it was naturally him. That's right. Although the Stormy Sea region has brought great damage to the Eastern region, it isn't without its benefits. It all depends on how you look at it. With this matter, you can take back some of your authority. Don't look at those old fellows who are becoming more and more tyrannical. Since they are begging you, you should order them around. If you miss this opportunity, there won't be another one. The Middle Celestial Master said. Yi Shiwen understood that those places were very strong. Usually, each of them had their own ruling core. They would not ask the Fortune God dynasty for help. Moreover, it was such a big matter. It was indeed a good opportunity. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen's bad mood also became much better. The situation in the Eastern region was simply a mess for him. Although he was also in charge of a region in the myriad heavens, he was almost equivalent to the founder of a country. He turned the tide in the myriad heavens and saved the world. His prestige was so high that no one dared to compete with him. Even the other emperors who achieved Tao later couldn't compare with him. In that case, any problems he encountered could be dealt with quickly, like a knife cutting through a tangled knot of hemp. It seems that you have thought it through now. In fact, many things are just like that, said the Middle Heavenly Master. The key is still your strength. As long as you are strong enough, with the Eastern Heavenly Master seal, the entire situation in the Eastern region will be under your control. At that time, you will have time to use the power of the Eastern region to cultivate. I understand, but I still have a question to ask. Yi Shiwen nodded and said, Ask away, said the Middle Heavenly Master as he took a sip of immortal tea. You know that I came from the path of fortune, but I want to ask, is there a way to return through the path of fortune? Asked Yi Shiwen. You want to go back? Said the Middle Heavenly Master with a little surprise. It seemed that he did not expect Yi Shiwen to want to go back, but he quickly figured it out. After all, Yi Shiwen came from another world, so it was inevitable that he would be worried. But he was born and raised in the Fortune God dynasty, so the situation was naturally different. Thinking of this, the Middle Heavenly Master frowned slightly. Yi Shiwen naturally saw this scene and could not help but ask, Why? Is it very difficult? Yes, it is very difficult. If possible, you better not think about this matter, said the Middle Heavenly Master. I have to find a way to go back. Recently, I have been feeling more and more anxious, as if something bad is going to happen. I can't feel at ease, said Yi Shiwen. During this period of time, he suddenly had a whim and suddenly had a thought because of this matter. At his level of cultivation, it was impossible for him to have an inexplicable whim. That was a hint from the heavenly Tao when his mind and spirit were in the unification of the way. Something must have happened that he did not expect. You said that it is very difficult, but it is not impossible, right? Yi Shiwen asked. What is the situation on the path of fortune now? Why can we only come from other worlds, but not from the Fortune God dynasty? This can be considered to be related to an old matter, said the Middle Heavenly Master. The Fortune realm is the supreme plane of the entire martial era. No matter in any aspect, the other planes are inferior to the Fortune realm. You know this, right? Yes. Yi Shiwen nodded. A long time ago, although there was an ascension barrier between the Fortune God dynasty and other worlds, it was not to this extent. Basically, as long as one reached the God King realm, they could feel the call of the Fortune realm and could ascend. But now, Only Emperor Realm experts can pass through the Fortune God dynasty. Even Emperor Realm experts cannot hear the call of the Fortune Realm, said the Middle Heavenly Master. As he spoke, his expression became more and more solemn. And the cause of all of this was an old matter. Because the ascension barrier was too weak, many people came and went from the good fortune realm to the various worlds. Some almighty beings also had a way to open the ascension passageway and return in the opposite direction. Later on, the so-called good fortune appeared on the path of good fortune. Fortune? Yi Shiwen said. I've heard of fortune before, but what is fortune? In fact, until now, we still don't know what the legendary fortune is. It has always been said that the fortune god Lord obtained the legendary fortune and became a supreme ruler. No one could defeat him. At that time, countless experts swarmed into the path of fortune and fought until the heavens and the earth split. You came from the path of fortune, so you should have seen the corpses on the ground, said the Middle Heavenly Master. The Central Celestial Master said that was left behind from that battle. Afterwards, the so-called land of good fortune appeared, and even the Celestial Masters were alarmed. They all went to the land of good fortune to try and find the legendary good fortune. As time passed, the world suddenly changed, and the land of good fortune underwent a heaven-shaking change. All the Celestial Masters who went there were trapped, and the road of good fortune was blocked by an inexplicable power. You can't go back unless you can obtain the good fortune key and open the road again. But the good fortune key has already been taken away by a senior of the human race. At the mention of that person, the Middle Heavenly Master couldn't help but frown. If not for the fortune key being taken away, the entire Fortune God dynasty and even the Fortune God realm wouldn't be in such a miserable state. The Heavenly Master Third Realm was actually a heavenly gate. I've heard about this many times, but I don't know who that person is. Yi Shiwen asked. Ever since he knew about the fortune key, he had heard about that senior of the human race more than once. His surname is Qin, but I'm not too sure what his full name is. The time he spent in the Fortune God dynasty was too short. He came and left in a hurry, so not many people know about his situation. If it weren't for you, he would be the most outstanding person I know. His cultivation speed is comparable to yours, the Middle Heavenly Venerate said. Emperor Qin. Yi Shiwen's heart was in turmoil. Chapter 36:26. Yi Shiwen guessed in an instant that the person with the surname Qin was most likely the Emperor Qin from the myriad heavens. If he came from the Fortune God dynasty, it would be impossible to not have any information about him. As long as he grew up in the Fortune God dynasty, he would definitely be recorded by the Fortune God dynasty. The Fortune God dynasty's ability in this regard was unquestionable. It was indeed powerful and terrifying, but there was no such person with the surname Qin. In the early years, it was rumored that he came from the heavenly Taoism. At the very least, he had the cultivation of an Emperor Lord. This kind of person could only be the Emperor Qin. This was not difficult to guess. Emperor Qin was already an amazing, legendary figure when he was in the 10,000 worlds. He was also the first person to break through the suppression of the world and become an emperor during the period of the Prohibition. And Yi Shiwen was only the second person to do so. And they were also the only two people to break into the Emperor Lord realm at this stage. The Emperor of Qin wasn't inferior to Yi Shiwen when it came to legends. Now that Yi Shiwen had reached his current height, it wasn't surprising that the Emperor of Qin, who had attained enlightenment many years earlier than Yi Shiwen, could do such a shocking thing. Seeing Yi Shiwen's expression, the Middle Heavenly Master seemed to have guessed something. He couldn't help but ask, "Why, do you know him?" Yi Shiwen nodded and said without hiding anything, "I know him. He is a legendary figure in our myriad heavens." Then he told the Middle Empyrean everything he knew about the Qin Emperor. Even with the Middle Empyrean's vast experience and knowledge, he had seen countless geniuses. However, after hearing so many things about the Qin Emperor, he couldn't help but sigh. In this world, There were always such heaven-defying geniuses that were completely different from others. Even the countless geniuses of the same generation couldn't overshadow their brilliance. However, to the Fortune God dynasty, this outstanding genius had made them suffer a lot. If someone could find him, they would probably want to tear him into 1,000 pieces. The good fortune key can be used to open the good fortune path. Although the original good fortune key is gone, hasn't a replica been forged? Yi Shiwen suddenly thought of this and said. The middle heavenly venerate paused for a moment and then said, although the fortune key isn't the creation universe map, the other supremes must agree at the same time in order to use the fortune key. I can't make the decision on my own. Moreover, every time I use the fortune key, it costs a lot of wealth. I'll pay for the wealth needed to activate the good fortune key, Yi Shiwen said. As for the other great heavenly lords, I'll have to trouble you to put in a good word for me. This matter is very important to me. I must return to the myriad heavens, no matter what. Since you are so determined, I will help you with this. I can help you talk to the other holy masters. I think they will give you face because of your situation. However, you will need to settle the wealth yourself. You have to go and come back as soon as possible. Middle Holy Master said. Yes, I understand. Thank you, fellow Taoist. I really have to rely on you today. Yi Shiwen thanked him sincerely. The Middle Heavenly Master had indeed helped him a lot this time. He had resolved several important matters in his heart. These were the things that he was most concerned about at present. Therefore, he wasn't just expressing his gratitude out of courtesy. It's all right. You and I will work together in the future. There will be time for you to return these favors, Middle Heavenly Venerate said with a slight smile. After sending off the Middle Heavenly Venerate, Yi Shiwen only felt at ease. His thoughts were clear. A big stone in his heart had been lifted. Sun Diandian just stood beside him. She didn't dare to speak at all. The conversation between these two men who could dominate the Fortune God dynasty was also like coming into contact with a whole new world for her. The matters of the high and mighty and invincible heavenly venerates could be settled with just a word from these two. Yi Shiwen was in a good mood. He said, Go and help me inform all the Eastern Territory heavenly venerates to come and see me, especially those who are trying to fight for territory. Yi Shiwen's words quickly spread throughout the Eastern Territory through Sun Diandian, especially the veteran heavenly venerates who were trying to snatch a share of the spoils in the empty provinces. At this time, they also understood that this was the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion finally making a move after a long period of silence. In the face of the frenzy of partition that had set off in the Eastern Territory, the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion, as the supreme ruler of the Eastern Territory, couldn't really ignore it, and the heavenly venerates couldn't really completely ignore the attitude of the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion. After all, any partition that didn't care about the attitude of the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion would be acting like a hooligan. In the end, they would have to pay the price. In that case, it was better to wait for the Eastern Sky Venerate to make a decision. This was also the first time that the newly appointed Eastern Sky Venerate participated in the ruling of the Eastern Territory's affairs. Moreover, it involved most of the veteran heavenly venerates, so it was undoubtedly more eye-catching. More people also understood that this meeting was estimated to determine the situation of the Eastern Territory for a long time in the future. After this huge change, it was unlikely that there would be any changes for a long time in the future. And this partition was also the last one allowed by the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion. Everyone attached great importance to it. After the Eastern Sky Venerates promotion ceremony, the heavenly venerates of the Eastern Territory once again gathered in the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion. The whole world was watching. Moreover, the other territories also had similar problems, but this problem had not been resolved yet. The solution of the Eastern Territory might also affect the decisions of the other great supremes. Therefore, Even the heavenly venerates of the other major territories were paying attention to the convening of this meeting. The Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion had just rested for a few days, and it began to become lively again. However, it was different from before. This time, after the handover of the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion, most of the core had fallen into the hands of the elites of the 11 provinces, led by the human clan. The heavenly venerates came to the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion one after another. Even many emperor lords came to the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion. They couldn't affect the general situation of the entire Eastern Territory, but they also wanted to persuade the important ministers of the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion to speak for their clans and sections. At this time, Yi Shiwen's distribution might be the difference between heaven and hell for them. The conference hall of the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion was once again full. Not only the heavenly venerates, but also the emperor lords were also sitting on the high throne. After all the heavenly venerates had arrived, Yi Shiwen arrived late. Everyone didn't say anything because Yi Shiwen was the Eastern Sky Venerate, the supreme existence of the entire Eastern Territory. Since everyone is here, I'll make a long story short. I've gathered everyone here today for one thing, and that is the issue of how to distribute the empty provinces, said Yi Shiwen, because everyone present was a high and mighty ruler of the Eastern Territory. Yi Shiwen didn't say any more polite words. Then I will say first, half of these provinces will be under the direct jurisdiction of the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion. What? All the heavenly venerates suddenly went into an uproar. Yi Shiwen was clearly trying to pull the teeth out of the tiger's mouth. How was it possible for them to spit out the territories that they had already swallowed? They were still thinking of obtaining the recognition of the Eastern Sky Venerate Mansion, and then occupying the territories justifiably. Now, Yi Shiwen was asking for an exorbitant price. He wanted half of the territories in one go. This was simply preposterous. How can this be? This old man has fought and risked his life to fight for the territory. Now, I have to hand over half of it for no reason. How is this possible? Eastern Sky Venerate, I think you shouldn't be too calculating, said a veteran heavenly venerate with a cold smile on his face. Fought and risked your life? Who fought and risked their life? Said Yi Shiwen as he looked coldly at the veteran heavenly venerate. I would like to ask you, how did you fight and risk your life? Yi Shiwen sneered disdainfully, as if mocking the veteran heavenly venerate's words. The veteran heavenly venerate immediately understood the other meaning behind Yi Shiwen's words. Clearly, they were ridiculing them for hiding when the allied forces of the Stormy Sea region attacked, and when the Fortune God dynasty repelled the allied forces of the Stormy Sea region. These people came out of nowhere to snatch their territory. At this time, talking to Yi Shiwen about fighting and risking your life was a joke in itself. You, the veteran heavenly venerate, slapped the armrest and said angrily. Yi Shiwen did not give in at all. He just looked at him coldly. At this time, he was no longer the same as before. These veteran heavenly venerates still dared to explode in front of him. More importantly, if he retreated at this time, then the other people behind this veteran heavenly venerate would probably want a foot after being given an inch. What? If I remember correctly, the person who defeated the Stormy Sea Region Coalition Army was me. The person who organized the Eastern Region Coalition Army was also me. When the Stormy Sea Region was wreaking havoc, what were you doing? You still dare to stand up at this time? Yi Shiwen shouted loudly, completely ignoring the angry gaze of this veteran heavenly venerate. Many of the sovereign emperors present nearly wanted to clap and cheer. They weren't like those heavenly venerables who had the ability to protect themselves. They weren't like those heavenly venerables who were trembling in front of the Tempest Sea region's allied forces. They didn't even know when they would be swept by the Tempest Sea region's allied forces. At that time, which of these veteran heavenly venerates stood up? They couldn't wait for the Stormy Sea Region Coalition Army to sweep away some of the Eastern region's major sections. Therefore, they had a strong resonance with Yi Shiwen's words. If Yi Shiwen hadn't organized the coalition army, some of them probably wouldn't have lasted until the Fortune God Dynasty's army returned. They would have been swept away by the Stormy Sea Region coalition army in the final darkness before dawn. Therefore, although the heavenly venerates had their own thoughts, most of the Emperor Lords supported Yi Shiwen. It was the Fortune God Dynasty who drove the Stormy Sea Region coalition army away. Your so-called territory is also the territory of the Fortune God Dynasty. Now, half of it is under the direct jurisdiction of the Fortune God Dynasty. Is there a problem? Yi Shiwen's gaze swept across the veteran heavenly venerates and said coldly. Chapter 36:27. Yi Shiwen's gaze was like a knife as it swept across these heavenly masters, as if he could see through them. The famous heavenly masters in the eastern region all lowered their heads. In the end, they were the ones who were in the wrong on this issue. When the foreign allied forces attacked, they all went into hiding. But when the foreign allied forces left, they all jumped out and fought for territory. This matter was definitely in the wrong. The trillions of creatures in the entire eastern region had witnessed all of this. Naturally, there would be justice for who was in the right and who was in the wrong. It was just that they collectively ignored it. If it was an ordinary person, they could naturally continue to ignore it. But Yi Shiwen was the Eastern region's supreme master. His words carried more weight than millions of creatures. Eastern Heavenly Master, it's not impossible for the Eastern Heavenly Master Mansion to take back some of the provinces. But taking half of it all at once is a bit too much. At this time, a veteran Heavenly Master said, although Yi Shiwen currently had the upper hand and no one wanted to face him head-on, at this time, since Yi Shiwen had already said this, they had to bite the bullet and stand up. If Yi Shiwen wanted a little less, then it would be fine. But he directly asked for half of it. If Yi Shiwen successfully took it, then it would be a huge loss for each of them. Too much. Yi Shiwen stood up directly and walked into the middle of these heavenly masters. He stood with his hands behind his back and just looked at the veteran heavenly masters. In front of these veteran heavenly masters, Yi Shiwen was just a junior, but now he was above them. He naturally knew that many of these people were secretly dissatisfied. It was only because of his identity, and Yi Shiwen had saved many of them that they did not jump out. But at this time, it was impossible to get off the tiger. Among these people, probably only Heavenly Master Xian Yuan, who did not have too many interests involved, could be at ease and not care so much. And among the other Heavenly Masters, even the Heavenly Master sect began to become nervous. It seemed that Heavenly Tao did not directly come forward to compete, but there were also people who supported them to compete. Once they succeeded, they would naturally have a lot of benefits. There was no such thing as a completely unrelated party. Under the heavens, all the lands belong to the king, and all the lands belong to the king. All the places you occupy belong to the Fortune God Dynasty. Are you trying to say too much at this time? Yi Shiwen sneered. Eastern Heavenly Venerable, you can't say that. Although it is said that all lands under the heavens belong to the Emperor, the Fortune God Dynasty can't oppress our living space too much. The veteran Heavenly Venerable couldn't help retorting. Suppress your living space. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but sneer as he asked, your living space is not something that I can suppress, but don't you think that the living space you are asking for is a little too much? Are we asking for too much living space? The veteran Heavenly Master said angrily, as dignified Heavenly Venerables, is it too much to only occupy a few prefectures? You should know that the human race directly under you, Eastern Celestial Master, occupies 11 prefectures. Yet you're saying that our request is too much. I'd also like to ask who is asking for more. The veteran Heavenly Venerables' words immediately resonated with many people. Yi Shiwen's direct subordinates' territories exceeded 11 prefectures. The amount of resources he could obtain was simply unimaginable. In addition to the resources of the Eastern Celestial Palace's direct subordinates' territories, as well as the taxes paid by the other Eastern region prefectures, the wealth within was simply unimaginably astronomical. Yi Shiwen, who possessed so much wealth, still felt that it was not enough. Moreover, he wanted to take away half of their harvest. How could they accept this? My direct subordinates' territories were fought for by myself and the human race. The big prefecture that you are fighting for now was recaptured by the entire Eastern region's forces. It should naturally belong to the Fortune God dynasty. If you had fought for the territory from the Stormy Sea region, it would naturally belong to you. But now that it is the Fortune God dynasty's territory, do you still want to monopolize it? I'm already being polite by asking for half. Yi Shiwen sneered and said, Do you think that there is such a good thing in the world where one can only reap without paying any price? All the heavenly venerables choked. They wanted to change the concept and talk about the big prefectures that they occupied, but Yi Shiwen was not fooled at all. He directly made a judgment based on who fought for these big prefectures. The original basis of these heavenly venerables was simply untenable. Rather than saying that Yi Shiwen was snatching food from the tiger's mouth, it was better to say that they were snatching food from the tiger's mouth from the Eastern Celestial Palace. They carefully tested the Eastern Celestial Palace's reaction. If the Eastern Celestial Palace's reaction was even a little weak, they would probably attack on the spot and ask for more benefits. However, it was obvious that Yi Shiwen's attitude was more unyielding than they had expected. If it weren't for the fact that it would be too unsightly to swallow all the big prefectures and trigger a counterattack from all the heavenly venerables, the Eastern Celestial Palace might even have a plan to swallow all the big prefectures and turn them into directly governed prefectures. If this plan was really implemented, then the Eastern Celestial Palace, which occupied more than 3/4 of the Eastern region's big prefectures, would also expand to an unimaginable level. The other major forces would not have the possibility of wrestling with the Eastern Celestial Palace at all. In fact, if the Eastern Celestial Palace coughed, the entire Eastern region would catch a cold. It was simply incomparable to the current, almost equal relationship. Even if the Eastern Celestial Palace took back half of the Eastern region, the Eastern Celestial Palace would still have an overwhelming advantage over the other forces. Even if the other forces joined forces, they might not be a match for the Eastern Celestial Palace. At this time, they discovered that they did not show up this time. They allowed the Eastern region to be conquered by the Stormy Sea region, and countless wealth was plundered. They also bore the resentment of countless creatures in the Eastern region. However, the Eastern Celestial Palace was the one who truly reaped the benefits. The Eastern Celestial Palace, Yi Shiwen, had defeated the Stormy Sea region's allied forces by himself and gained supreme prestige. Then the Eastern Celestial Palace opened their mouth like a lion and annexed half of the big prefectures. In other words, the Eastern Celestial Palace had taken all the good things in the end, and they had to bear all the blame. This feeling was very sullen, no matter how one looked at it. However, they also knew that no one could shake off the Eastern Celestial Palace on this issue. If it was the original Eastern Celestial Palace or the current Celestial Master, they would not dare to have such thoughts. A person's authority needed to be established over a long period of time. Although Yi Shiwen had gained a lot of favors and gratitude in the past, favors and gratitude and authority were two different things. However, they could not say anything to refute. It must be known that Yi Shiwen was right. He stood on the moral high ground. Usually, this moral high ground was useless. However, Yi Shiwen had the backing of a super big tree like the Fortune God dynasty. Therefore, it was extremely useful. At this time, a sigh was heard. Who else could it be but the Heavenly Tao, Sect Master? Eastern Celestial Palace, since this matter has come to this point, and as you said, it's fine if the Eastern Celestial Palace wants a share of the pie. However, how do you intend to divide the remaining half? Said the Heavenly Tao, Sect Master. Among the civilian forces, he was the leader, not to mention the Eastern domain, even in the entire Fortune God dynasty. The Heavenly Tao Sect Master was a leading figure. His strength was among the best among the civilian peak heavenly venerables. This time, all the veteran heavenly venerables wanted to resist the Eastern celestial palace. Naturally, he was also the leader. Now that he had admitted defeat, it meant that the other veteran heavenly venerables would also admit defeat. At this time, there was no benefit in continuing to resist the Eastern celestial palace on this issue. If the Eastern celestial palace took half of the big prefectures, it would inevitably be difficult for them to resist the Eastern celestial palace in the future. However, if they did not agree now, they would not even be able to keep their territory. Regarding this issue, their own development was more important. Even if the Eastern celestial palace gained an advantage, it would only be more difficult for them to survive. However, if they could not gain a foothold now, there was no future to speak of. Previously, they had watched the Stormy Sea region invade without doing anything, bearing the resentment of billions of lives. What was it for? Wasn't it for a foothold? Half of these territories belonged to the direct jurisdiction of the Eastern Celestial Palace. The other half will be divided according to everyone's qualifications, achievements, and contribution in this battle. As I said, how much effort you put in will determine how much territory you get, said Yi Shiwen. This was the distribution plan that he had thought of long ago. Naturally, he had other ideas. As soon as Yi Shiwen said this, some people were happy while others were worried. Those who were worried were naturally the celestial masters who had preserved their strength and wanted to snatch territory later. Those who were happy were naturally the celestial masters who had contributed. Yi Shiwen's distribution plan could not be found to be wrong. In particular, this distribution plan had the support of many celestial masters. At least half of the celestial masters supported Yi Shiwen's plan. This allowed Yi Shiwen's plan to be approved. The other celestial masters also knew that there was no way to say anything on this issue, who asked them to not contribute in the beginning. At this time, there was no other way to distribute less. However, when Yi Shiwen's specific distribution next, a heated discussion was set off. The root cause was that Yi Shiwen had given 5 of these big prefectures to the human clan. Suddenly, this aroused fierce opposition from many celestial masters. For them, this was Yi Shiwen benefiting himself at the expense of the public. It was simply selfish. How could they tolerate this? Eastern Celestial Master, aren't you going too far by doing this? How can the human clan be able to divide the land of 5 big prefectures? Asked a powerful celestial master fiercely. Chapter 36:28. Yi Shiwen looked at the great heavenly master and said, "What ability!" If I remember correctly, when most people were hiding like cowards, it was the humans who stepped forward bravely and organized the Eastern Region Allied forces to block the Tempest Sea Region army. What I want to say is, if such a great contribution is considered a virtue or a qualification, then what virtue or qualification do you have to seize territory? Yi Shiwen's words directly made the heavenly master choke. This heavenly master was depressed to the point of having internal injuries, and the other veteran heavenly masters almost vomited blood. Because they did not go to war and hide, Yi Shiwen seemed to have a good handle on them. He could use it at any time, and he was in an invincible position. Every time he used it, he would hit them with a stick, and every time he used it, he would hit them with a stick. It was surprisingly useful, and it made them so depressed that they wanted to die. He was simply deliberately angering them to death. Because of Yi Shiwen's active actions, he stood on the moral high ground. If it was an ordinary situation, it would not be a big deal. Yi Shiwen could not face the anger of so many Eastern Region veteran heavenly masters at the same time. However, it was different now. With the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion and the Fortune God dynasty behind him, Yi Shiwen was strong to the extreme. Such a handle could be used by Yi Shiwen countless times. How could this not make those veteran heavenly masters vomit blood? It was simply too uncomfortable, and Yi Shiwen's expression was clearly saying, "I will use it, so what? I will use it, I will use it, I will use it." Yi Shiwen's words made them swallow their words. In the battle against the invasion of the Stormy Sea area, they had indeed done absolutely nothing. Even so, the Heavenly Sect's hierarch braced himself and stepped forward. Facing Eastern Venerable Yi Shiwen, who was like the sun in the sky, the Heavenly Sect's hierarch began to feel pressured. However, Yi Shiwen might not be able to make him feel such pressure. But after he became the Eastern Heavenly Venerable, he had no choice but to take the pressure seriously. Eastern Heavenly Venerable, you have already allocated half of the provinces for the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion. We have already agreed to this. Now you want to allocate 5 provinces for the humans. Isn't this a bit too much? The Heavenly Path sect leader could not help but say, the human race already had 11 states, but if they could get another 5 states, then they would have the ability to compete with the Heavenly Church's territory. In the Eastern region, the Heavenly Tao sect had always been the strongest force among the people, second only to the Eastern Celestial Venerate Manor. Even the Silver Moon clan was much weaker than the Heavenly Tao sect. Moreover, if the strength of the human race were to expand once again, the human race would have the confidence to compete with the heavenly religion in the Eastern region in the future with the support of the Eastern Lord Yi Shiwen. In fact, they might even have the ability to replace the heavenly religion in the future. Even for this, he had to stand up and speak, even if he had to go against Yi Shiwen at this time. The words of the Heavenly Path sect leader were immediately echoed by the other veteran Heavenly Venerates. Perhaps they were unhappy that Yi Shiwen had allocated half of the provinces, or perhaps they had the same thoughts as the Heavenly Path sect leader. They didn't want the power of the human race to further increase. At this time, all of them voiced their opposition. I think you are mistaken. Although I am the leader of the human race and the Eastern Heavenly Venerable at the same time, these are 2 different identities. I represent the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion in taking half of the provinces. This is because of the role of the Eastern Region Coalition Army in this war, and the leading role of the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion in this war. Moreover, the whole world belongs to the king. This is a matter of course. Yi Shiwen was not moved, or perhaps he had already thought that others might ask this question. So he was very clear. And now, I am making this request as the leader of the human race. The human race played a central role in the previous war, so it is reasonable for us to receive a reward as a central pillar. Previously, half of the provinces were directly under the Fortune God dynasty, and the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion did not belong to the human race. Now, I want a reward from the human race. These words caused many Heavenly Venerables words to be stuck in their throats. Even though they knew that a portion of the wealth that belonged to the Eastern Heavenly Venerate Manor would have to be handed over to the Fortune Divine Dynasty, they knew that the human race would also be able to obtain a considerable amount of wealth. This was also one of the unspoken rules that everyone tacitly agreed on. This was one of the rights that the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion should have, so it could not be said openly. On the surface, the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion was the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion, and the human race was the human race. The 2 were 2 completely different forces, so naturally they could not be counted together. At this time, it naturally did not make sense to forcibly count them together. In the end, these veteran Heavenly Venerates could only open their mouths, but no words came out. This was because they had no way to refute, so they could only acquiesce. Moreover, they all knew that even if Yi Shiwen took away more than half of the provinces, the remaining empty provinces were still a huge cake, and the person who held the knife to cut the cake was none other than Yi Shiwen. The Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion, coming forward to divide the territory, was also the only method and plan that everyone could possibly agree on. At this time, they must not offend him to the extreme. Seeing that everyone had agreed, Yi Shiwen could not help but smile slightly. For the human race, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expand their territory to the point that it could be compared to the Heavenly Tao sect. They truly had the potential to develop to the point that they could stand shoulder to shoulder with the heavenly Dao sect and the Silver Moon clan. In addition, the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion would also reap great benefits, and the die-hard supporters of the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion would also obtain great development, which would indirectly increase Yi Shiwen's strength. In order to provide the resources that he needed for cultivation, the foundation would increase bit by bit in this way. However, after determining the shares of Yi Shiwen's Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion and the human race, it was not easy to determine the division of forces of the others, especially when every Heavenly Venerable wanted to divide more under their own name. There were all kinds of quarrels, and some even wanted to fight on the spot. However, in the end, they still gave Yi Shiwen face and did not fight in the end. These celestial masters were constantly quarreling, and even the emperors had come forward to ask Yi Shiwen to protect their interests. These supreme powerhouses of the Eastern region, who were the most aloof and remote, were cursing and swearing for their own interests. They even rolled up their sleeves and started a war. For an entire month, all the celestial venerables and emperors were in closed-door training and didn't come out to discuss these matters. They weren't as happy as they were when Yi Shiwen had allocated half of the big provinces for the Eastern Celestial Venerables and 5 big provinces for the human clan. Sometimes the Celestial Venerables would even quarrel over a single big province. In the end, the division plan was finally released. This plan integrated the opinions of all parties, including compromises, conflicts, and many other aspects, especially the great Heavenly Venerates, who basically gained something. Giants like the Heavenly Dao sect, which seemed to have no relations with each other, also further increased their influence through this division plan, allowing the forces they supported to occupy more provinces. As soon as this plan was released, it shocked the world. Overnight, the entire Eastern region and even the Fortune God dynasty were discussing this matter. Originally, the hottest topic during this period of time was the final division of the empty provinces. It had already affected the nerves of the Fortune God dynasty and the supremes of the other domains, because this division would have an extremely far-reaching impact. It could even affect the Fortune God dynasty for the next tens of millions of years, and no one could ignore it. Among these large domains, the Eastern region would be the first to start its own division, and the division of the Eastern region would obviously affect the division of the other domains. Therefore, everyone was paying attention to the final result. When this result was released, many people sucked in a breath of cold air, especially when the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion was directly divided in half. This also meant that the strength of the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion would also be greatly improved. The Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion was already very strong, and now it was greatly strengthened. With the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion, as an example, it was very likely that the other domains would follow suit. If that was the case, it would not be good news for the local tyrants. However, in the face of such a strong Fortune God dynasty, they had no way to resist, nor could they say anything against it. It was the army organized by the Fortune God dynasty that repelled the allied forces of the other domains. Now, it was only natural for them to swallow the biggest cake. This was a matter of course, and no one could say anything. After this round of explosive growth, the strength of the Fortune God dynasty was bound to be greatly improved, and this would also have a huge impact on the situation of the entire Fortune world. Although the Fortune God dynasty's vitality was greatly damaged, it was an indisputable fact that its control over the entire Fortune world was increasing. Therefore, no one could say for sure whether this series of changes would be a good thing or a bad thing for the Fortune God dynasty. Under such circumstances, Yi Shiwen had won 5 large provinces for the human race, which was a small matter. This matter was a joyous occasion for the human race, but for the entire Fortune God dynasty, it was just a small matter. The entire Eastern domain had also entered a period of intense turbulence following this distribution. The various forces had finally entered the final stage of cooperation and competition. For Yi Shiwen, these things were no longer the focus of his attention. He was only responsible for the division and the adjudication. The final result would depend on their own efforts. The only thing he was concerned about was the 5 big prefectures occupied by the human race. They were located near the Stormy Sea area. It was a brand new domain. Yi Shiwen had personally set up transmission arrays for these 5 big prefectures. Moreover, he had directly brought hundreds of billions of human race to various places in these 5 big prefectures for development. Fortunately, although the human race was not large enough to completely occupy the 5 large provinces, with the speed of the human race's reproduction, they would soon fill up the entire new territory. Everything was thriving, and it was finally time for Yi Shiwen to return to the myriad heavens domain. Chapter 36:29. At this time, the entire Fortune God dynasty was caught up in the battle for the vacant provinces after the war. It was getting more and more intense. Although the supremes of the Fortune God dynasty had already divided their territories, it was not easy to make these supremes obedient. In the process of handing over the territories, it was inevitable that there would be all kinds of fights and wrangling. Whether it was the Fortune God dynasty or the outer domains, they were desperately licking each other's wounds, continuing to strengthen and restore their strength in preparation for the next war. Therefore, the Fortune God dynasty and the outer domains ushered in a rare period of peace. They did not try to devour each other or attack each other. Amidst such turmoil, Yi Shiwen gave many instructions to the human race. After leaving Swordmaster's avatar behind, he went to the Fortune God capital alone. Swordmaster's avatar now had the strength to oversee the Fortune God capital. He had also obtained great benefits from this war. It would not be long before he could break through to the 4th realm and become a good helper for Yi Shiwen. In the depths of the Fortune God capital, in the Fortune Heavenly Palace, in the most secretive microcosm, a huge key floated in the center of the microcosm. This key was emitting 7 colored rays of light. The divine splendor was like rain, filling the entire microcosm. This was the fortune key that controlled the switch of the path of creation. And in this microcosm, 2 figures emerged. They were the Middle Heavenly Master and Yi Shiwen. "East Heavenly Master, have you thought it through?" said the Middle Heavenly Master. Yi Shiwen nodded and said, "I have thought it through." Yi Shiwen couldn't help but feel excited at the thought of seeing his relatives and friends in the outer domains again. In the past, he could have brought his parents with him, but in the end he did not. For him at that time, the world behind the path of creation was too dangerous. Whether it was the many legends from ancient times to the present, or the rumors he heard from Lucifer and the others that were closer to the truth, they all proved that the path of creation was dangerous. Later on, he embarked on the path of creation alone. The facts proved that his worries were not unreasonable. On the path of creation, he narrowly escaped with his life. If he was not careful, he could have died a tragic death. Therefore, he didn't regret not bringing his parents' tribe with him. However, things were different now. He had gained a firm foothold in the fortune world and had the conditions to bring his parents' tribe over. Most importantly, he had no choice but to start his plan to return to the myriad worlds ahead of time due to his sudden uneasiness. "Since you've already made your decision, I have nothing more to say. You can go back for 10 years. After 10 years, I will open the good fortune key again. At that time, you should be able to feel the existence of the good fortune path again. You can directly break through the crystal wall and come back. Therefore, you have 10 years. You only have 10 years to deal with the trivial matters in the universe. However, I think that with your ability, there shouldn't be anything that can delay you for that long," the Middle Celestial said. The other Heavenly Venerables weren't very supportive of Yi Shiwen's return this time, as they felt that it was a waste of resources. Even if Yi Shiwen was the one who had to contribute the wealth this time, in addition to the fact that the Fortune God dynasty had just been established, and he, a newly ascended Heavenly Venerable, wasn't around, how could they suppress the eastern region's small fry? However, since Yi Shiwen was so insistent, they couldn't come forward to oppose him. "I understand. In that case, I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist, Yi Shiwen said. The middle celestial venerable nodded with a dignified expression and began to make hand seals. The hand seals were extremely complicated, and in an instant, thousands of hand seals were made. The good fortune key began to vibrate slowly, and the divine splendor scattered between the heavens and the earth. Immediately after, the divine splendor was mobilized by an invisible force, and it turned into a pillar of rainbow that soared into the sky, directly blasting into the sky above the fortune god capital. This earth-shattering change caused the heavens and the earth to change color. It immediately attracted the attention of the heavenly venerables of the entire fortune god dynasty. These heavenly venerables were in harmony with the heavenly Tao, so even the slightest disturbance in the heavens and the earth couldn't escape their notice. Moreover, it was such a shocking change. They felt it almost instantly. It was the good fortune key. They had already felt it when the good fortune key was first made. Except for a few great supreme venerables, no one else knew what was happening. They also didn't know what kind of change had caused the middle celestial venerable to reactivate the good fortune key. Immediately after, before they could react, Yi Shiwen stepped into the rainbow pillar with a complicated expression on his face. In an instant, he had already disappeared from the sky. After Yi Shiwen disappeared, the middle celestial venerable immediately stopped the good fortune key. Before the other heavenly venerables could react, it was already over. The heavenly venerables were confused, and they couldn't figure out what had happened. However, after leaving their divine senses in the fortune god capital for a long time and didn't find anything strange, they could only resentfully withdraw their gazes. No matter what kind of guesses they had in private, or what kind of unspoken criticism they could only give up at this time. The flower bloomed on both ends, and Yi Shiwen stepped into the rainbow pillar. In an instant, he had already entered the good fortune path. In an instant, it was like an ordinary person entering a desert. He couldn't absorb even a tiny bit of spiritual energy. Speaking of which, this was already Yi Shiwen's third time coming to the good fortune path. However, everything was already completely different. The first time he came, he had been killed by Emperor Primordial Chaos like a stray dog. The second time he came, he was already a heavenly venerable, and he had slain this ancient calamity. The third time he came to the good fortune path, he was already one of the few powerful figures in the entire fortune god dynasty. At a glance, he could see the various laws and rules of the entire good fortune path. In particular, those crystals were incomparably hard. Back then, he hadn't been able to destroy those crystals, even with his Emperor Lord power. Now he could see through many things. In the past, he didn't know, but now he knew. Those were the laws of many ancient eras, and now they were all tangled together. As an Emperor Lord, he couldn't comprehend them, but for the current him, comprehending the laws of other eras at the same time was also a method that he could use as a reference. Yi Shiwen immediately waved his hand and emptied an entire mountain of crystals. They might be useful in the future. Since he had come to the good fortune path, Yi Shiwen had no intention of leaving. Instead, he began to search for the law crystals formed by the laws of this era. These law crystals were extremely precious. They were special crystals that would only form under extremely special coincidences. Even heavenly venerables couldn't form these special crystals with remarkable abilities. In fact, the fortune god dynasty even guessed that these special crystals that contain the laws of this era would form under special circumstances when the good fortune heavenly monarch fought with someone. Moreover, these crystals were closely related to entering the heavenly venerable realm. With these crystals, the chances of entering the heavenly venerable realm would be much higher. One could imagine how precious these resources were. Otherwise, heavenly venerables could produce these special crystals themselves. In that case, the number of heavenly venerables in the entire fortune god dynasty would increase by several times. Their strength would also increase by several times. These law crystals were naturally not as meaningful to Yi Shiwen as they were before he entered the heavenly venerable realm. However, they could still be used as a reference. Most importantly, even if he didn't need them now, Bien Xia, the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor, the human sovereign, and the others still needed them. These law crystals were precious resources that could only be found on the good fortune path. Naturally, he couldn't let them go. He had to find more. After all, opening the good fortune path once required a massive amount of resources. Even he would feel distressed just looking at it. He had already used up most of his wealth. Now, the wealth and resources needed to open the good fortune key had to be mortgaged using the future income of the Eastern region. Although half of the income of the Eastern region had to be handed over to the Fortune God dynasty, the rest had to be used for the Eastern region itself. There were also many forces loyal to the Fortune God dynasty and the Eastern Heavenly Venerable Mansion that needed to be nurtured and strengthened. However, considerable wealth and resources were still left for Yi Shiwen, the Eastern Heavenly Venerable. This was also the fundamental reason why the Supreme Masters didn't oppose Yi Shiwen's return to the myriad heavens, even though they didn't support him. After all, Yi Shiwen would be the one paying the price in the end. Yi Shiwen felt distressed thinking about the price he had to pay. Naturally, he wanted to get as much as he could. It was extremely difficult for him to find these law crystals when he was still an emperor. However, now that he was more than 100 times stronger than when he had first arrived here, it was naturally much easier for him to find them. After plundering 100,000 law crystals formed on this good fortune path with great difficulty, he finally left this area after confirming that there wouldn't be any more law crystals in the short term. He directly set foot on the path he had come here from. There were corpses exuding a powerful imperial aura on the roadside. After countless years, they still looked the same as when Yi Shiwen had first arrived here more than 10,000 years ago. At that time, Yi Shiwen would still be shocked to see so many corpses of imperial supreme masters. However, Yi Shiwen treated it as normal now. He had even killed many heavenly venerables, let alone emperors. He didn't care about them at all. However, now that he had come to this good fortune path again, his thoughts were much more complicated than before. The more secrets he knew, the more he felt that this good fortune path wasn't reduced in the slightest. In fact, it was even more mysterious. As he thought about it, he had already arrived at the end of this good fortune path. It was a crystal wall that exuded 7-colored light. The divine light illuminated the heavens. "I'm back." Yi Shiwen sighed softly. His figure had already passed through the crystal wall. This was the myriad heavens that he had been dreaming of. Chapter 36:30. Yi Shiwen felt as if countless golden lights were pouring in from all directions as soon as he crossed the crystal wall, and they poured into his body. Various kinds of power faintly followed along with these golden lights and poured into Yi Shiwen's mind. An ordinary person would have turned into an idiot on the spot. However, Yi Shiwen reacted immediately. These golden lights turned out to be the power of faith. They were the power of faith from all over the heavens. They were incomparably huge. All the power of faith in Yi Shiwen in the world had transformed into the power of faith and had drifted between the heavens and the earth in the form of the power of faith. Now that he had returned, the heavens and the earth had responded immediately. The power of faith from all over the sky and the earth had also blotted out the sky and covered the earth. These were the power of faith from hundreds of millions of living beings that had accumulated over the years, and they had covered him almost at the same time. It would have taken a long time for Yi Shiwen to collect these power of faith when he was still an emperor. That was because the composition of the power of faith from all over the world was too complicated. It was an ability transformed from the spirit, and it was also mixed with the power of faith from hundreds of millions of living beings. So it wasn't pure. It was quite troublesome to deal with it. It would have taken a long time to deal with it, even with the power of an emperor. However, Yi Shiwen's current strength was naturally very easy to collect all these power of faith from all over the world. The transformation was completed in an instant, and it turned into a majestic energy. Then he stored it away. The Imperial Villa City was a divine city that had just emerged in the past 10,000 years. It was located in the depths of the universe. However, it was the holy land of countless races in all over the heavens. In particular, the human race regarded this place as another holy land for their race in addition to the heaven realm. This was because the Martial Emperor had broken the crystal wall here in the past and had entered the legendary Road of Fortune. Later, the human race, the divine court, and Yi Shiwen's pilgrims from all over the heavens built the Imperial Villa City here to commemorate Yi Shiwen's departure. Yi Shiwen hadn't been on the throne for tens of thousands of years, so they shouldn't have remembered him to this extent. However, Yi Shiwen had only been on the throne for tens of thousands of years. It was far shorter than the reign of other emperors. However, he had done a lot of things. He had pacified the chaos of the Heavenly Clan, sealed and exiled the Heavenly Clan, pacified the Corpse Calamity, and pacified the manipulator behind the scenes who had been spying on all over the heavens for countless years. He had beheaded several emperors, established the highest code of conduct in all over the heavens, and restrained the behavior of other emperors. He had brought the already weakened human race back to the position of the supreme race in the world. These things hadn't been forgotten by people because it had only been tens of thousands of years in total. It could be said that all over the heavens were still in the post-Emperor Martial Emperor era. Even the current emperors of all over the heavens were mostly influenced by the Martial Emperor. Although it couldn't be said that the Martial Emperor was the most powerful and influential emperor in the recent era, at the very least, he could be said to be the most powerful and influential emperor in the recent era. This was an achievement that even the Emperor Qin hadn't achieved. Because the Emperor Qin's strength lay in the fact that the Emperor Qin himself tore apart the shackles and proved his Tao. However, he couldn't bring others into the emperor's path. After Yi Shiwen proved his Tao, many people related to him had already achieved Tao. The Divine Court Supreme Emperor Mo, the Lord of the Demon Race's Heavenly Court, the Demon Lord Invincible Yi, and the second Demon Master Kunping in the world. Among his 3 wives, 2 of them were female emperors that no one had achieved since the creation of the world. He ruled the endless spirits of the Inferno, established reincarnation for the living beings of the world, and completed the way of heaven and earth. He was the Lord of Inferno, the Dead King. There was also one of the 3 races that dominated the world at the beginning of the world, the Phoenix race's second emperor besides the Phoenix ancestor, the Phoenix ancestor. Even the current Lord of the Demon Race, Emperor Yuan of the original Demon Race, received Yi Shiwen's help to successfully cross the heavenly tribulation. Among the emperors, there were many people who were related to him. One could imagine how powerful the Martial Emperor Yi Shiwen was in the myriad heavens and realms. Although he had left the myriad heavens and realms and went to the path of creation, his power hadn't diminished. Naturally, there are countless people who spread his name for him. Therefore, there were many people who were on a pilgrimage in Imperial Bee City at any time. In the center of Imperial Bee City, an incomparably huge statue stood in the city. It was more than 10,000 feet tall and went deep into the clouds. It had unimaginable power. This statue was personally erected by the Phoenix ancestor, one of the Martial Emperor's wives. It had the laws of the Emperor and the magical power of the Emperor. In the crisis that it had encountered, it actually manifested the true body of the Martial Emperor, killed the strong enemy, and protected the living beings in Imperial Bee City. Therefore, many people lived here for generations. It was no longer limited to Yi Shiwen's pilgrims, the descendants of the human race, and the people of the Divine Palace. But at this time, Imperial Bee City was in turmoil. Outside the Imperial Bee City, an endless army surrounded the entire Imperial Bee City. There were roars and roars everywhere. The army attacked from all directions. There were countless flags, and it was hard to count. After this army surrounded the Imperial Bee City, they were desperately attacking. However, Imperial Bee City naturally wouldn't be powerless at this time. In the various boundary worlds of Imperial B City, countless divine palace armies and the armies of various forces of the human race rushed out one after another. The pilgrims who could come here for a pilgrimage were not powerless people. Each of them was a powerful expert of their respective race. Deity level was just ordinary. Divine king level and quasi-emperor level were not rare at all. For a time, relying on the defensive boundary of Imperial B City, the entire army was blocked outside the city. And in the city, the huge statue of the martial emperor was also faintly flashing with light. The extreme laws were flashing with unimaginable light. From time to time, rainbow pillars would sweep out and sweep into the army that was besieging the city. On the spot, countless elite soldiers would be swept into powder, but the army that was besieging the city was too many. Even if a batch was swept away, it was still of no use. More and more armies would come to besiege the city and fill the little hole. But even so, there was not much panic in the city. The army that could be stationed here was undoubtedly the entire divine palace and the most elite of the human race. They had experienced countless bloody battles. Even if they fell into a desperate situation, they would still calmly face death. One by one, Emperor level boundaries and tactical formations were activated. With these Emperor level boundaries and tactical formations, they could contend against the endless army outside. Otherwise, no matter how elite the divine palace army was, in the case of such a huge difference in numbers, it would be useless. There was no way to contend at all. And in this army, a group of quasi-emperors with powerful auras surrounded a young girl. They flew out of the city and into the center of the military formation. Their eyes were fixed on the endless army outside the city. The young girl at the head was wearing a phoenix robe. The phoenix robe was burning with raging flames. Each of these flames seemed to have a world, and there were countless gods chanting scriptures of the great Tao. In her hand, a silver-gray halberd floated horizontally in midair. The tip of the halberd was emitting a terrifying divine light. Just this silver-gray halberd alone possessed a might that could suppress the heavens and earth. It was as if it could sweep through an army of 1,000, killing and shattering all powerful enemies. There were a few faint visions manifesting on the girl's body. She cultivated a few supreme Tao scriptures at the same time. The scriptures that were supposed to be completely incompatible with each other were now completely compatible with each other on her body, and all of them manifested visions. Generally, people who cultivated one Tao scripture would become a famous expert in the world. Moreover, there were so many Tao scriptures, and it would also attract the attention of others. But anyone who knew the identity of this young girl would not find it strange. Indeed, this was how she should be. In the world, except for a few emperors, there was really no one who could be more noble than her. There were only a few who could stand shoulder to shoulder with her. Although her face was young, her expression was solemn and she did not panic. Obviously, she was also in existence who had experienced hundreds of battles. Strange, the Divine Palace still has the ability to send extra troops to attack us. Behind her, a blue-faced quasi-emperor spoke. It was unknown which race he was from, but at this moment he stood respectfully behind the young girl and became her follower. Not only him, but other people were also pursuers of this young girl. It was not because she forced them to follow her because of her family background, but because of her extraordinary charm. These powerful quasi-emperors, who could shake the world with a stomp of their feet, all followed her and treated her as a future emperor. Back then, those who had followed those famous emperor monarchs had now achieved success and fame. They also hoped that they could make such immortal contributions. The two great helpers who had followed the Qin emperor to conquer the world had now become the elders of the entire heaven realm. Even the emperors would not look down on them. And those who followed the martial emperor were even more incredible. Among them, there was even an existence like Emperor Mo. These were the role models of these people. Perhaps they could replicate such a miracle, but the others did not have such confidence because the probability of becoming emperor was too small. among 100 peak quasi-emperors. There might not be one who could do it. However, the young girl in front of them was different, not only because of her illustrious background, but also because of the great reputation she had built over the years. She had created such a situation with her own strength. Perhaps in the future, she would have the ability to replicate such a miracle and become a supreme legend in the universe. I am worried that something has happened in the divine court. Now that the divine palace army is coming, I originally wanted to come to the Emperor's city to cultivate in seclusion, to see if there is a chance to pass through the Emperor Great Tribulation. Now it seems that time waits for no one. The young girl said with a serious expression, "Watch me kill them first." As the young girl spoke, she held a silver-gray halberd in her hand. Her figure flashed, and a pair of wings appeared behind her back. She directly killed her way into the endless army outside the city. Chapter 36:31. The girl's figure flashed, and she charged into the army outside the city. The silver-gray halberd in her hand was like a long dragon that swept into the army. Fast, 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 fierce, fierce, fierce. With this halberd in hand, the young lady's bravery was unstoppable. Wherever she passed, the army would scatter and turn into ashes. The silver-gray dragon was extremely terrifying. Those who were swept by it would die if they were hit, and they would be injured if they were touched. No one could stop it. In just a few breaths of time, the countless soldiers outside the city had been swept away. She was unstoppable. Behind her, dozens of figures charged out one after another and joined the battle. There weren't many people following them, but they were able to force the army that was surrounding the city to retreat again and again. These people were the girl's followers. The weakest was a peak divine king. They had not cultivated for a long time, but they were already famous young experts. The quasi-emperors were one of the most powerful people in the entire universe. At this time, they were willing to follow the girl in front of them. They fought all the way to the unknown. Seeing the girl's amazing performance, the morale of the entire army in the Emperor's city soared. They all recognized the girl and cried out in surprise, "She is indeed the princess. There are not many quasi-emperors who can fight with her. She has many supreme Tao scriptures. If she becomes an emperor in the future, she will definitely shock the world." Of course, the princess is the supreme pride of the entire human race and the divine court. As long as she is here, the army of the celestial race is nothing. Kill them all. Follow the princess, kill. The morale of the army soared. All kinds of terrifying attacks swept into the army of the celestial race. The army of the celestial race was not to be trifled with. They had the advantage in numbers. For a moment, the whole scene was hard to decide. A fierce battle broke out in an instant. Originally, the Emperor's city did not have the advantage in terms of military strength. However, the girl's performance was too amazing. No one could get close to her. The long halberd in her hand swept across thousands of miles. Anyone who was swept by it would die without exception. Naturally, she became the target of the Tian clan army's attacks. However, when those attacks landed on her body, they were all burned into nothingness by the flames spat out from her phoenix robe. They were unable to harm her. Facing such an invincible defense and unstoppable attack, even the experienced Tian clan army started to panic. They could be fearless, but in the face of a battle that they had no chance of winning, how could they not be terrified? Finally, within the Tian clan army, there were also powerful experts who could no longer continue watching. A figure directly flew over, transforming into a monstrous rainbow pillar that swept towards the young girl in the middle of battle. As soon as the rainbow pillar touched the girl's body, a shocking divine phoenix appeared on the girl's body, protecting her. The rainbow pillar couldn't do anything to her in the end. At this moment, the rainbow pillar dissipated, revealing a human figure. It was a man with the appearance of an old man. This old man looked incomparably old, but his body exuded a terrifying blood energy. He didn't look like an old man with one foot in the grave at all. He was clad in golden battle armor, looking like an unparalleled god of war. "Do you think you can run away today? My lord has mobilized the army to capture you. I want to see if they will still resist my Tian clan army like this after the little princess of the divine palace is captured." The old man said loudly, "You should quickly surrender. On account of your father's prestige, we won't make things difficult for you." "You still dare to mention my father?" The young girl said disdainfully, "You are all just defeated opponents of my father. If my father was here, how could you all be so impudent? So what if a martial emperor is here? You have no idea what kind of person has revived this time. This time, even if a martial emperor is reborn, what can he do? He can't even stop that person from advancing." The old man was not angry at the fact that the young girl had defeated him. This was because he was incomparably confident that this time, even if the legendary martial emperor were to revive, there would be no possibility of a comeback. Their Tian clan had been exiled for far too long. It was time for them to return to the myriad heavens realm. All the races that wanted to resist would be completely annihilated this time. The previous few revivals had all been suppressed. How could they, who were proud and arrogant, accept this? Long-winded, the young girl did not say anything more to him. She only raised the halberd in her hand and suddenly smashed it down. The halberd erupted with an aura of death that filled the sky, almost freezing the entire space. The pressure of the Emperor's way that filled the sky swept out. It was too terrifying. Although the halberd's performance was already extremely shocking, in reality, it had not truly displayed its terror, but now it had truly erupted. Dao artifact. You actually have a Dao artifact on you. The golden-armored old man immediately revealed a shocked expression. He recognized the halberd in the young girl's hand. It was actually a Dao artifact. Even for their rich and powerful Tian clan, Dao artifacts were extremely rare, and it was even more impossible for them to be casually distributed to those who had yet to reach the Dao. And to be able to grasp a Dao artifact before reaching the Dao, they were basically the most talented, the most accomplished, and the most likely to reach the Emperor-King realm in the future. Only these people were qualified to become the masters of a Dao artifact. At this time, he suddenly remembered whose daughter this young girl was. When that person was in power, he did not know how many Emperor Kings he had killed, including the Tian clan's Emperor Kings, who knew how many Dao artifacts she had in her hands. Thinking about it, it was very normal for this young girl to have a Dao artifact. That is the supreme Dao artifact of Ming Di, the Dark Dragon Halberd. But just as he understood, the halberd in the young girl's hand had already slashed down, bringing with it a terrifying torrent of death energy that no one could resist. The golden-armored old man was directly swept away. His body flew backward, and he spat out a mouthful of old blood. Just this blow alone had defeated the golden-armored old man. His eyes were still filled with unimaginable horror, although he had long known how terrifying the young girl in front of him was. In recent years, when the Tian clan reappeared and broke out of the seal, it was the God Court that held the first line of defense, and this young girl had frequently appeared on the battlefield. Apart from the Emperor Kings of the various heavens and realms, she was ranked the most dangerous within the Tian clan, and she was even known as the number 1 quasi-emperor. Originally, he did not take her to heart at all. What number 1 quasi-emperor? She was just a little doll who had cultivated for tens of thousands of years, not even a fraction of the number of years he had cultivated. What number 1 quasi-emperor? That was just a title that the God Court flattered on her behalf. Because of her noble status, her father was a supreme existence that still spread his name throughout the various heavens and realms. Even if she cultivated all sorts of supreme Tao scriptures and was very powerful, it shouldn't be a problem for him to just hold her back. He was so confident, but that strike just now had already fiercely beaten him out of his beautiful dream. He could not even take one blow from her. How terrifying was this? Could she be able to contend with an Emperor King? And after sending the golden-armored old man flying with one blow, The young girl was not satisfied. She even frowned slightly, and there was surprise in her eyes. "You actually didn't die," she only said indifferently, because she was very clear about the power of the nether dragon halberd in her hand. The two previous owners were all experts that shook the world, and now that it was in her hands, it did not lose its prestige. It was unknown how many powerful enemies it had killed, and even a quasi-emperor should not be able to block a blow from the nether dragon halberd. Normally, in order to train herself, she rarely used the nether dragon halberd, so the golden-armored old man in front of her did not expect that she actually had such a great killing weapon in her hands. However, the result of using the great killing weapon for the first time was not satisfactory, and it was not able to kill the golden-armored old man. However, she did not know that the thing that she was not satisfied with had already scared the Heaven Race army to death. The young girl did not know the origin of the golden-armored old man, but they knew that the status and qualifications of the golden-armored old man played an important role in the entire Heaven Race. Even the Emperor King of the Heaven Race would listen to his opinions seriously. He was an old antique who had participated in the previous war of resistance against the heavens. Yet he was actually unable to withstand even a single move from this princess whose name had shaken the universe. Just how terrifying was she? An even crazier and more terrifying thought suddenly rose in their minds. Could she have become an emperor? When they thought of this thought, they almost fainted. Becoming an emperor and not becoming an emperor were two watersheds in the universe. A powerful Emperor King could kill them all by himself, and they would not be able to fight back. The young girl's gaze landed on the golden-armored elder. She saw that the golden-armored elder was protected by a dazzling golden armor. Just now, under the attack of the nether dragon halberd, there was a shocking crack on the armor, but it did not completely shatter. One could imagine how powerful this armor was. Pseudo-Dao tool! The young girl immediately understood what this armor was. It was a magic tool refined with materials that were about the same level as a Dao artifact. However, compared to a Dao artifact, it did not have an Imperial Emperor's great Dao integrated into it, so it could only be called a pseudo-Dao artifact and not a Dao artifact. However, even so, a pseudo-Dao tool was still shockingly valuable. Ordinary Emperor Kings did not have it, and only a few peak Emperor Kings had a pseudo-Dao tool. It was completely obvious that this golden-armored old man had an extraordinary background. However, this is as far as I can go. The young girl said faintly, "If it was any other time, I would be very interested in competing with you. But now I do not have that kind of time. I will kill you first, lest a long night brings trouble." The young girl said and attacked again. Chapter 3632. This golden-armored old man had been a peak quasi-emperor for many years. It could be said that he was a very powerful existence among peak quasi-emperors. If not for the fact that he had not triggered the heavenly tribulation of a sovereign emperor, it was possible that he had already stepped into the realm of a sovereign emperor. Such an opponent was hard to find in the world. If not for the urgency of the situation and the fact that it was not a good time to fight, this young girl would definitely put away the nether dragon halberd and fight with him. Although she was invincible with the nether dragon halberd, she did not rely on the halberd to establish her reputation as the number one quasi-emperor. Her cultivation was also earth-shattering. The people of the celestial race had just come out of seclusion and did not believe it, but the people of the other realms had long believed it. Even disregarding her identity as a princess, she was ranked first on the Sovereign Emperor Reserve list. She was known as the most likely quasi-emperor to become a sovereign emperor. At this moment, she also knew that she could not drag on with this old man for too long. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Buzz! The halberd suppressed the heavens and the earth. The tip of the halberd burst forth with the divine light of death, illuminating the entire world. Then the halberd fell towards the golden-armored old man like a long dragon. The golden-armored old man naturally did not dare to take it head-on. Although he was wearing a pseudo-Dao tool that he had painstakingly refined over many years, a pseudo-Dao tool could only dominate among ordinary magic tools. Against a true Dao tool, It was simply seeking death. The difference was not in the materials, but whether it contained the great Tao of a sovereign emperor. The death martial scripture that this young girl cultivated in her body was exuding the divine light of death. Together with the nether dragon halberd, the power that erupted was even more terrifying. The golden-armored old man wanted to escape, but how could the young girl let him escape? In the blink of an eye, the nether dragon halberd expanded with the wind and grew to 10,000 miles long. It swept across a large area and directly landed on the golden-armored old man. Clang! There was the sound of metal colliding. The nether dragon halberd landed on the golden-armored old man's body, and immediately there was a crisp sound of collision. The golden-armored old man once again felt a terrifying pressure crushing down on him. He directly coughed up a mouthful of old blood. He felt like his internal organs were about to be crushed. At this moment, he finally believed the rumors. The young girl in front of him definitely lived up to her reputation as the #1 quasi-emperor. This was not only because the netherworld dragon halberd had crushed the golden armor on his body, but also because of the young girl's strength. Against a veteran quasi-emperor like him, an old fellow who had gone through several heaven-defying battles, this young girl did not seem to be at a disadvantage at all. She even had the upper hand in terms of cultivation, completely suppressing him. This caused him to be unable to help but have the impulse to roar into the sky. This is simply impossible. Could it be that those princes and princesses are really so terrifying? Just by relying on his bloodline, he was able to cultivate to such a level? This was a terrifying existence that had never been seen before and would never be seen again. The nether dragon halberd landed on the golden armor, but the girl simply pulled back her hand with an indifferent expression. The crescent blade of the nether dragon halberd stabbed into the golden armor and was dragged back. The nether dragon halberd had chopped off the arm of this veteran, peak, quasi-emperor. It was just a simple pull. The might of this nether dragon halberd was truly terrifying to the extreme, although that golden armor was also a pseudo-Dao tool, and the materials used to make it seemed to be about the same. The difference in performance between the two was too great. Ah! The veteran quasi-emperor screamed miserably and retreated repeatedly. He held the place where his arm was cut off, and blood kept flowing out. The golden blood flowed out at this time, but it was actually grayish-black. This was the effect of the law of death. The deathly chi on the nether dragon halberd was too heavy. This did not affect the young girl much, and could even improve her strength. However, to this quasi-emperor, it was like a nightmare that could not be cleansed. In fact, at this moment, he no longer had the mood to cleanse it. As long as the deathly chi did not continue to invade his physical body, it was already very good. This deathly chi was too terrifying. If he did not stop it, most likely his entire physical body would completely collapse, and even his primordial spirit would be contaminated and obliterated. Tisk, it's just SOO. The sky race is too arrogant. They actually only sent you to capture me. The young girl was disdainful. The sky race had really underestimated her. How could the title of the #1 quasi-emperor be undeserved? With the nether dragon halberd, she even dared to fight with an emperor. She would not be defeated with just one touch. As she spoke, the young girl launched her third attack. The nether dragon halberd danced, and it was an extremely brilliant halberd technique. She had long practice to the point where her technique was close to the Tao, but she rarely had the opportunity to use it. Ordinary emperors did not even need to use this halberd technique to kill them. And once it was used, it covered the sky and turned into all kinds of attacks, almost covering the golden-armored old man, not giving him a chance to escape. It was the same as before. Although the golden-armored old man tried to escape and did not dare to resist, facing such a terrifying nether dragon halberd, he could not escape at all. He was directly struck by the halberd. This time, the golden armor on his body could not withstand the attack at all, or it could be said that it had already been broken. It was already very impressive that he could withstand these two attacks under the situation where there was a difference in the strength of his master and grade. This time, the golden-armored old man was cut in half on the spot. He could not withstand the attack of the nether dragon halberd at all, and even his primordial spirit was destroyed. There was no suspense at all. From the beginning to the end, the young girl had the upper hand. An entire process of the battle had only used a mere 3 moves. After killing the old man, the golden armor on his body also fell into the hands of the young girl. It could not withstand the nether dragon halberd, not because the quality of the golden armor was too poor, but because the nether dragon halberd was too terrifying and her own strength was above the old man. It could be said that this golden armor was still very precious, and it was unknown how many Tao tools were used to make it. This young girl displayed her divine might, and even the peak quasi-emperor of the other side was defeated in 3 moves. This greatly boosted the morale of the experts of the divine palace and human race in the entire Emperor city. Their morale was like a rainbow, and they actually counterattacked the entire celestial race army, forcing them to retreat step by step. As for the celestial race's army, they saw that their top experts had been completely defeated. They didn't even have to go through a bitter battle before they were defeated. They had overestimated themselves and went forward to resist. Then they were easily turned into ashes in 3 moves. And all of this was a blow to the morale of the celestial race army, and even made them a little confused. Even if it was an elite army, in the face of such a battle, it was difficult for them to have the determination to fight to the death unless they were determined to protect something. This young girl was like a rampaging Tyrannosaurus Rex. Everywhere she went, the celestial race army collapsed, and they were not even able to withstand a single move. Just one person had the power to defeat 1,000 soldiers. And at this time, the hidden experts of the celestial race finally could not sit still. If they let this young girl and her followers continue to kill, the entire army would really collapse before the battle even started. Previously, the tragic death of the golden-armored old man had frightened them, and they did not dare to go forward to stop them. But now, even if they were afraid, they had to go forward to stop them. Once the army collapsed, they would not be able to complete their goal, and even if they were lucky enough to escape, the consequences would be unimaginable. A middle-aged quasi-emperor dressed in iron clothes and holding a long spear jumped out, wanting to stop this young girl. Unfortunately, before he could finish his sentence, he was smashed into pieces by the netherworld dragon halberd. He was completely unable to stop this young girl. One after another, quasi-emperors jumped out and even formed formation. They walked forward in 2s and 3s, trying to stop the young girl from advancing. However, in front of the young girl and her nether dragon halberd, they were nothing at all. They were smashed into pieces in a matter of minutes. Unknowingly, in just a few short breaths of time, the young girl and her pursuers had actually killed their way through the entire celestial race army. During this process, no one was able to stop them, and not even a single one of them was able to withstand a single blow. Whether it was enchantments, formations, quasi-emperors, or war fortresses, none of them could stop her footsteps. They could not even slow her footsteps. One person killed his way into the 9 heavens. One person killed his way into the 9 underworld's prison. No one could stop him. One person caused the world to tremble. Strong, too strong. The celestial race army unexpectedly showed signs of collapse. In the face of such an unstoppable army, who could stop them? Some of the veterans who had participated in the Great War tens of thousands of years ago even saw the figure of the person from tens of thousands of years ago on the young girl. She was also invincible and also unscrupulous. On the contrary, the divine court army in the Emperor city became more and more courageous as they fought, because they had such a powerful leader. And at this time, a terrifying coercion finally descended, pressing down on the 9 heavens. The Emperor city, which was under the protection of countless enchantments and formations, began to shake violently, as if there was a powerful force constantly shaking the entire city. This is an emperor, an emperor. Quickly retreat. All of you retreat first. The young girl frowned, and then almost immediately came to a conclusion. She understood what kind of existence was behind this coercion. That was an invincible supreme being in the entire myriad heavens. Although she was invincible and held the nether dragon halberd in her hand, she also understood the gap between them. Her background made it impossible for her not to understand the terror of those emperors. The followers behind her were also top-notch experts. They were either peak divine kings or quasi-emperors. They reacted almost immediately, but it was too late. A giant hand with a radius of millions of miles appeared out of thin air and pressed down. Chapter 30, 633. Buzz. A huge sound wave was heard, followed by a huge hand that fell down fiercely. This huge hand was thousands of meters wide, like a piece of the sky falling down. The speed of this huge hand was not fast, but the terrifying power was like a fixed body technique, freezing the young girl and the others, making them unable to move. They could only watch as this huge hand fell down, about to slap them to death. At this moment, many people in Emperor Beast City cried out in alarm, but they didn't have the time to stop it. They could only look on helplessly as the hand descended. Even if they wanted to stop it, they wouldn't be able to. Everyone under the Emperor Beast City was an ant. This was not just a saying, there were not even quasi-emperors. It was impossible for them to stop it. Suddenly, at this time, the nether dragon halberd in the young girl's hand suddenly seemed to be greatly stimulated and provoked, bursting out a buzzing sound. An invisible Tao-might swept out, as if there was a terrifying power bursting out from it. The nether dragon halberd was truly unsealed. This was the power of the nether dragon halberd. Because the power of the nether dragon halberd was too terrifying, it had been sealed for a long time. Otherwise, once it exploded, even the young girl would find it difficult to control it, and it would inevitably lead to a big problem. But at this moment, it was a completely different matter. When that huge hand descended, it was equivalent to the attack of a monarch. This made the nether dragon halberd feel as though it had encountered a provocation from someone else. It suddenly revived, becoming even stronger and even more terrifying. If the young girl used the nether dragon halberd with this kind of power, there was no need for 3 consecutive slashes. Just one slash would be enough to instantly turn the old man into ashes. It was just that even she could not control the nether dragon halberd in this state, so she did not use it that way. At this point, she had no other choice but to go all out. At the same time, she hurriedly swallowed a godly pill to replenish the power that was leaking out of her body like flowing water. It was simply too difficult for her to control the nether dragon halberd at its peak state alone. At the same time, the Tao might burst out from the nether dragon halberd, instantly freeing the young girl, and the others from the Tao might emitted from the huge hand. So they did not stand there and be smashed to death, nor did they have any reaction. Go. You guys retreat. The young lady immediately said in a loud voice. That big hand could not be resisted at all. Even if they used all their strength, the difference was too great, just like how the Tian clan army could not stop her at all. Whether it was the formation, enchantment, military formation, or war fortress, none of them could stop her because the difference between them was too great. And the gap between her and the monarch would only be greater than the gap between the Tian clan army and her. The followers felt as if they had been pardoned. They just glanced at the girl and didn't stay any longer. As the girl's followers, they were prepared to die for her. However, they also understood that they were useless in a battle of this level. On the contrary, they would only be a burden if they stayed. It was better to escape back to the Emperor City and think of a way. Show! 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 These people all turned into light curtains and disappeared from where they were. They quickly flew into the Emperor City. Fortunately, they didn't wander around and didn't go too far. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to escape in such a short time. The nether dragon halberd in the girl's hand suddenly left her hand and flew into the sky. It turned into a nether dragon and roared towards the sky. It almost pierced a hole in the sky and fiercely collided with the huge hand. The monarch level fluctuation instantly swept out. Many of the Tian clan army who didn't have time to escape were almost instantly swept into ashes. Even the entire Emperor city was rumbling and shaking. The followers of the young girl who had just escaped, only now did they realize the danger. If they were a step slower, the consequences would be unimaginable. Thump, thump, thump. The young girl retreated several steps, only feeling that the blood and qi in her body were agitated. Her expression was incomparably solemn. The nether dragon halberd had reduced most of the power. If she were to block this palm, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although she was already known as the #1 quasi-emperor and was recognized as the #1 person among the many quasi-emperors in the heavens and 10,000 realms, and killing other peak quasi-emperors was simply like slaughtering chickens and dogs, but compared to a monarch, she was still too immature. It was just that the monarch casually made a move, and she, who was using all her strength, was actually forced to retreat. If she didn't have the nether dragon halberd, her first reaction would be to escape. Only by escaping into the Emperor city would she have a chance to escape. It was really too terrifying. Although she already knew how terrifying a monarch was, but it was the first time she personally experienced it. In the past, none of the monarchs she knew would attack her like this. Retreat. Almost at that moment, she had already made a decision. She couldn't fight the monarch head-on. She had to rely on the Emperor city to have a chance to wrestle with the monarch of the Tian clan. She had the nether dragon halberd, and perhaps she wouldn't be completely helpless. She had no other choice. Swoosh! After the nether dragon halberd collided with the huge hand, it seemed to be suppressed, and its light dimmed a little. Suddenly, it turned into a stream of light and flew back into the hands of the girl. The girl almost instantly unfolded a pair of black wings, turned into a stream of light, and swept past. "Want to leave?" Suddenly, in the endless sky that was covered by banners, an incomparably huge face emerged. This face was tens of thousands of kilometers long, like a huge mountain, lying horizontally in the air, incomparably terrifying. This huge face was handsome and looked extremely outstanding, but at this moment it represented boundless killing intent and terror. Another enormous hand appeared out of thin air, and then it slapped down towards the young woman. It caused the world to collapse, the laws and space to be blasted into pieces, and it formed a black domain that was difficult to pass through and obstructed the young woman's path. Even with the girl's strong physical cultivation, she did not dare to forcibly cross this black absolute domain. Just the fragments of the laws were enough to tear her to pieces. Just a little bit of the emperor's methods was enough to make those quasi-emperors despair. There did not seem to be much of a difference, but in fact, the difference was like heaven and earth. However, this girl was not ordinary. She took a step forward and immediately emitted a sky full of golden light, protecting her body. With the protection of the nether dragon halberd, she was about to cross the black absolute domain, the chaos crack. However, it was clear that the emperor of the Tian clan would not let her escape so easily. Even this time, he personally moved out, and his target was this girl. How could he let her escape like this? Purple qi filled the sky, and the emperor of the Tian clan was already in front of the girl. At this moment, everyone saw that it was a handsome young man wearing an imperial robe. He was tall and slender, more than 2 meters tall. Among ordinary people, he was definitely a crane in a flock of chickens. Seeing the appearance of this person, some of the Tian clan's troops that were originally on the verge of collapse immediately calmed down. Everyone was completely at ease. As long as this emperor existed, there was absolutely no reason for them to fail. That was the emperor of their Tian clan. After blocking the girl outside the imperial city, the young man only had a smile on his face. "Not bad, your performance was very good," as expected of his daughter. "Tens of thousands of years ago, I was not able to fight with him. It was a pity. Now that I have killed his daughter, it can be considered as a sacrifice to the souls of my Tian clans dead in heaven. If my father was still here, how could you have such a chance?" The girl stopped and no longer tried to break through, because she knew that these little tricks were meaningless in front of this emperor. Little girl, you still don't understand. The times have changed. Even if the martial emperor is still alive, he can't reverse the situation. That is already not something he can do. This is the next golden age of my Tian clan. Why do you have to resist? The young man said with a face full of pity, with the strength of your human clan and the divine palace, if you are willing to submit. Do you think my Tian clan will treat you harshly? We can even let bygones be bygones. Our Tian clan has the heart to rule over the universe. Even if you were once traitors, we can accept you again. That is impossible. My human clan is indomitable. It is impossible for us to submit to anyone, even if we die. The girl was not moved. She just said indifferently, since that is the case, then I can only kill you. Your position in the divine palace is very high. Wait until I capture you, the only bloodline of the martial emperor. I want to see if the divine palace will still resist. The young man said coldly, do you still hope that the martial emperor will come back? That is simply impossible. No one who went to the path of creation will come back. There are unpredictable dangers inside. He will not come back. You are really too stupid. Stupid. The girl smiled, then immediately restrained her expression. Only fight. Only fight? You have the strength of character. It is a pity that the war between the two clans cannot tolerate people with strength of character like you. The young man smiled. It was very casual, but his attack was exceptionally terrifying and ruthless. One of his hands turned into a cage that covered the sky, grabbing the girl. He had his own arrogance as emperor. He did not need to use any magical powers or laws to resist him. Suddenly, at this moment, endless heavens might began to gather in the sky, almost in the blink of an eye, forming a terrible tribulation cloud. The young man immediately withdrew his hand, looked up at the heavenly tribulation above his head, and could not help but say, Emperor, heavenly tribulation! Chapter 30, 634. Emperor-level heavenly tribulation. Everyone's eyes widened because they did not expect that the girl would choose to trigger the emperor-level heavenly tribulation at this time. Any emperor-level heavenly tribulation was the most important thing in a quasi-emperor's life. Even if they were fully prepared, there was a possibility of failure, not to mention that it was launched in a hurry. That was simply a dead end. It was impossible to succeed. So no one thought that she would do this. It was simply incredible. Not good if she triggers the emperor-level heavenly tribulation at this time, even if the Tian clan emperor is temporarily scared away. I am afraid that he will not be able to protect himself. She would rather die than fall into the hands of the Tian clan by triggering the emperor-level heavenly tribulation at this time. There were even faint sounds of weeping in the Emperor-Beast city, crying for the fall of a generation's pride of heaven. It was not easy for such a character to appear in the myriad heavens and myriad realms, but now he was going to die here. Do you want to use the power of heavenly tribulation to force me to retreat? The Tian clan emperor said lightly, not panicking. Or do you think you have a chance to defeat me while crossing the tribulation? I remember that your father once did it, but do you think you have such a chance? I am not someone who has just entered the emperor-level realm. This kind of method is just a joke in front of me. If we fight, we may have a chance. If we don't fight, we can only die. At this time, the girl held the dark dragon halberd, feeling the increasingly powerful and terrifying heavenly tribulation. She grew up listening to her father's legend, and she had heard of her father's battle achievements. Just listening to it made her feel that it was a miracle. However, when she really triggered the Sovereign Lord Tribulation, she understood how difficult it was to defeat a strong enemy while undergoing the tribulation. It was simply an impossible task. It was a myth, a legend. But being forced to this point, she had no other choice. She was very clear about her identity. If she was captured, what would the consequences be for the Divine Court? In the current situation, she had no other choice. Wallalala. The first bolt of lightning was suffused with a terrifying electric light, like a fierce dragon that was thousands of miles long, directly bombarded down, sweeping towards the girl and also sweeping towards the Tian clan emperor. Rumble. When the first bolt of lightning fell, countless bolts of lightning fell at the same time, forming a shocking sea of lightning that engulfed the two of them in an instant. That dazzling golden light filled the universe. It was so dazzling that no one could look at it directly. They opened their heavenly eyes, but they could only see a blurry silhouette. That terrifying heavenly tribulation. Any random lightning bolt could kill a god king. Many people in Imperial Bee City could feel the increasingly terrifying pressure increase. It was as if the heavens were angry because someone was interfering with the heavenly tribulation. This was something the world could not tolerate. At this moment, a figure appeared in the city. He stood firmly in the city and casually looked at the universe, but it seemed as if he could see everything. Who else could it be other than Yi Shiwen? At this time, he was surrounded by people, but everyone seemed to ignore him. They didn't even notice that there was someone standing next to them. They treated him as air, but when they came within 3 feet of him, they would instinctively give way. He didn't even notice that there was such a large, empty space next to him. Little Moon Tooth has already grown so big. Yi Shiwen looked at the girl in the endless heavenly tribulation. There was a bit of gratification in his eyes, but also a bit of guilt. When Little Moon Tooth was growing up, he couldn't accompany her. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of years had passed, and Little Moon Tooth had become a famous figure in the universe. Just now, he was mixed in the crowd, and he also heard that Little Moon Tooth's current reputation had already surpassed her status as a princess. She was the #1 quasi-emperor in the world, which was the #1 person under the emperor. This was also the title that he had in the beginning. Now that the successor was his daughter, he was also very gratified. He saw all of this just now, but he didn't make a move. The emperor of the celestial race was a terrifying master that was difficult to match in the entire Imperial Bee City, but for him it was nothing. So he simply didn't make a move and used him as a whetstone for Little Moon Tooth. Now that Little Moon Tooth had attracted the Emperor Tribulation, in his opinion it was nothing. On the contrary, it was the right choice. Many veteran quasi-emperors, after countless years, ultimately did not dare to attract the heavenly tribulation. Why? Was it because they really didn't prepare well enough? In fact, it wasn't like that. They had already made preparations long ago, preparing for hundreds of thousands of years or even millions of years. Actually wouldn't have any better results, because they had really reached the peak, but their hearts were actually already afraid. They were completely afraid of the heavenly tribulation and did not dare to attract the heavenly tribulation, because under the heavenly tribulation, the survival rate was really too low. It was 1 in 100 or even 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000, which made those veteran peak quasi-emperors completely terrified. If they did not attract the heavenly tribulation, they could still pass the endless years leisurely like this until the end of time. Although the temptation of becoming an emperor was great and limitless, after all, there was great danger and the success rate was too low. This was the fundamental reason why they were not willing to detonate the heavenly tribulation. With Little Moon Tooth's current cultivation and with a Tao tool, it could be said that all the conditions were met. Even if they continued to prepare, it would be very difficult to have any other breakthroughs. Detonating the heavenly tribulation now was actually no different from detonating it in the future. The only difference was probably the existence of that emperor. And this was also a kind of training for Little Moon Tooth. The path that she had walked before, only after she truly walked it would she understand the role of these training in the future. If she had not gone through hardships, it would be impossible for her to be so powerful in the Emperor realm. So he did not make a move, but he was also prepared to make a move at any time. Once something went wrong, he would intervene. He only wanted to sharpen Little Moon Tooth, but he did not really care about her life and death. At this time in the heavenly tribulation, the two were facing the baptism of the heavenly tribulation. The emperor of the Sky Clan was bathed in the sea of thunder and lightning, motionless. Although the heavenly tribulation was terrible it could not even break his defense. And in front of him, although Little Moon Tooth's physical cultivation was not as good as the Emperor of the Sky Clan, her phoenix robe played a timely role. This phoenix robe was originally a Dao tool of the Phoenix Clan's phoenix ancestor. Originally, it was obtained by the phoenix ancestor, Hua Menghan. Later, after Hua Menghan achieved the way, she refined her own Dao tool, and this phoenix robe was given to Little Moon Tooth. With 2 Dao tools in hand, one for attack and one for defense, even an emperor might have the power to fight. So she dared to attract the heavenly tribulation. The power of the thunder fell on her body, and all of it was burned into nothingness by the Nanmingli fire on the phoenix robe. But she also knew that this was just the beginning, and the real test was still to come. With 2 Dao tools in hand, you really deserve to be the little princess of the divine palace. But it is a pity that you have them. The Emperor of the Sky Clan looked at the girl in front of him and could not help but sigh. 2 Dao tools, how luxurious was this! Even he did not have such treatment. A bit of greed flashed in his eyes. Of course, ordinary things would not be able to move him, but Dao tools were different. Even for an emperor like him, this was an unimaginable wealth. Moreover, there were 2, one for attack and one for defense. It could be said that it was the most suitable. Whether it is a pity or not, we will know after the fight. Little Moon Tooth's eyes were firm, and she moved instantly. She could not wait for the Emperor of the Sky Clan to make the first move. Otherwise, there would not be many chances left for her. In this extremely dangerous situation, she attracted the heavenly tribulation and wanted to fight. But it did not mean that she did not know how terrible the Emperor was. Only by using the heavenly tribulation to balance him. Although the main test of the heavenly tribulation was herself, the Emperor of the heavenly tribulation would also become the target of attack, and he would have to bear more pressure. This was the only place where she had a chance of winning. The nether dragon halberd swept across the sky in the endless thunder tribulation, and swept towards the Emperor of the Sky Clan from a very strange angle. In the hands of Little Moon Tooth, this halberd technique was really displayed to the extent that it was close to the Tao. It was hard to imagine. This attack was tricky and strange, like a heavenly steed flying through the sky. There was no trace at all, and it directly blasted towards the Emperor. The Emperor sneered and directly punched out, using his fist to resist the nether dragon halberd. He was not afraid at all. If it was another emperor controlling the nether dragon halberd, he would definitely not dare to do so. But the same Dao tool, in the hands of different people, the power was like heaven and earth. Although Little Moon Tooth was already the #1 emperor, she was still not an emperor. Bang! An incomparably loud roar, the sound turned into a sound wave, sweeping across the universe so that the originally silent place could hear this loud sound that shook the universe. Little Moon Tooth only felt a terrifying force sweeping across, landing on her body, and her arm was trembling. But she only shook slightly, and a golden light flowed over her arm, dispelling the numbness. Then she waved the nether dragon halberd and launched an attack. She could only fight fast now, and catch this Emperor of the Sky Clan unprepared. Otherwise, there would be no chance at all. As for the Emperor, he didn't care at all and received Little Crescent Moon's attack. In just a moment, the 2 sides had already fought many times. Although Little Moon Tooth's strength was far inferior, with 2 Dao tools in hand, she could attack and defend. For a moment, she was actually able to fight with the Emperor of the Sky Clan, and they were evenly matched. All the experts in both camps held their breath, because in the next second, the outcome could be decided. Chapter 36-35. Especially the people in the Emperor City. They were on tenterhooks, because everyone knew the gap between the quasi-emperor and the emperor. Even if they had a Dao tool, it would not be able to bridge the gap, not to mention that they had attracted the heaven's retribution, and they had to use it to resist the heaven's retribution, which made them even weaker. Speaking of which, no one was optimistic that Little Crescent Moon could win in this situation. The battle between the 2 sides reached the peak, the stage of white-hot, the thunder retribution that fell from the sky became more and more terrifying. At the beginning, the ordinary thunder retribution could easily kill those god kings, but later, the 5 elements thunder retribution, yin and yang thunder retribution, and all kinds of thunder retribution, almost turning the whole world into nothingness. At this time, the army of the Tian race no longer dared to besiege the city, only dared to guard the surroundings, watching the heavens' retribution from afar, not daring to go forward. Otherwise, they would be bombarded to pieces. They did not dare to approach at all. It seems that I can't continue to delay. The Tian race emperor shook off Little Crescent Moon with one blow, then said lightly. He looked up at the heavens' retribution in the sky. It was getting denser, and even some of the heavens' retribution that could hurt him was mixed in. It was precisely because he, the emperor, joined in the difficulty of the heavens' retribution was rapidly increasing, faintly injuring him. He knew that this was a warning from the way of heaven. If he did not leave, then the heavens' retribution would not only target Little Crescent Moon, who had not yet become an emperor, but even he who had become an emperor would be seriously injured. Even if he had become an emperor, in front of the true way of heaven, he was still so insignificant there was no comparison at all. Therefore, he must kill Little Crescent Moon before the heavens' retribution increased again, although he could also watch Little Crescent Moon be killed by the heavens' retribution. He could not guarantee that Little Crescent Moon would be killed by the heavens' retribution. After all, there was a certain chance of success. Moreover, it would definitely take a very long time to overcome the heavenly tribulation. It would be long enough for the divine court and all the races in the universe to receive the news and come to the rescue. This was exactly what he didn't want to see, because he had only come to take them by surprise, and he wasn't prepared to fight a protracted war with the races in the universe at all. Little Crescent Moon's expression became more and more serious, because she knew that this was the most crucial moment. She had to use the heavenly tribulation to force the celestial emperor away. This was the most crucial moment. If she could endure it, then her plan might succeed. If she couldn't, then it was very likely that she would die miserably here. She had no choice but to attack again. It was another bloody battle. Little Yu, or his body, was emitting golden light. All kinds of ancient scriptures appeared at the same time, manifesting all kinds of strange phenomena. Her power came precisely from these extremely powerful ancient scriptures. It was extremely terrifying. She immediately pounced forward, like an azure dragon traversing the heavens. With an angry roar, the galaxy collapsed. At this time, Little Yu became extremely terrifying. The laws were bursting forth, erupting with countless divine marks, turning into a terrible rainbow pillar, sweeping towards the celestial emperor. Among the quasi-emperors, your means are considered very good, but you have to understand that all this is not enough. In front of me, these means of yours are really too immature. The celestial emperor laughed and blasted out a punch. A terrible light burst out, forming a bright fist force. It suddenly swept out, and wisps of immortal light scattered like rain. His great path had been sublimated to the extreme, shattering the heaven and earth. In an instant, the rainbow pillar blasted out by Little Yu was smashed into pieces. The two of them were not existences of the same level at all. This terrible fist force swept out, and its momentum did not diminish. It directly blasted into Little Yu's body, although the phoenix robe blocked most of the fist force for her. Just the vibration of that terrible force still shook Little Yu and sent her flying. She spat out a mouthful of blood. Just now, if it were not for the phoenix robe, she would not only have been sent flying, but most likely her entire body would have been smashed apart. It was extremely miserable, but she still did not retreat because she knew that it was time to truly decide the outcome of the battle. She pinched a spell, and suddenly hundreds of millions of brilliants were released from her body. The divine brilliance was like rain, and the entire universe was filled. And in the center of these immortal lights, Little Yu turned into a divine phoenix that danced in the 9 heavens. With a cry, the heaven and earth trembled, and the great path responded to her momentum. Blazing light burst out, turning into a frenzy of energy. The divine phoenix rose and fell, and actually directly rushed to the front of the Celestial Emperor, using attack as defense. The Celestial Emperor's expression suddenly became a bit serious. He saw what he saw. After little Yuya turned into a divine phoenix, she actually had a terrifying strength that could faintly contend with him. He immediately understood that little Yu had summoned the original spirit of the phoenix ancestor contained in the phoenix robe. At this time, she could suddenly increase to the point where she could temporarily contend with the Celestial Emperor. Now, the heaven and earth changed color, trembling under the divine might of this divine phoenix. The lightning struck down and fell on the body of this divine phoenix, but even the flames on its body had no way to break through. Bang! 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 Of course, this Celestial Emperor was not an ordinary person. He was also an extremely terrifying existence. He directly swung his fists and fought with this divine phoenix. For a moment, there was actually no clear victor, and it was difficult to determine who was superior. However, even the most clumsy person could see that in such an intense battle, there was no change in the Celestial Emperor. He still seemed to be at ease. However, the divine phoenix's momentum was no longer as strong as it was at the beginning, and even its body began to gradually become transparent. It was enough to see that it would not last for long. I want to see how long you can last. The Celestial Emperor sneered. With a little more time, he would be able to defeat this divine phoenix. At that time, he would see how many methods little Yuya had to resist. And at this time, suddenly within the nether dragon halberd, an azure dragon soared through the sky. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws, looking extremely ferocious. It directly rushed towards the Celestial Emperor, wanting to stop his attack and buy enough time for little Yuya. A dragon and a phoenix formed the power of a dragon and a phoenix. At this time, they actually produced a strange resonance. One on the left and one on the right, they actually blocked the Celestial Emperor's attack. However, it was only a temporary defense. Every time the Tian clan's ruler attacked, he could leave a terrifying wound on the body of the divine phoenix and the azure dragon. Cracks could be seen with the naked eye. One could imagine what kind of attack they were enduring. And at this time, the sky and earth changed color again. Under such an intense battle, the heaven's retribution once again increased. At the same time, it was also extremely terrifying. The endless thunder retribution turned into one expert after another, forming a mighty army that swept out. From the depths of the clouds in the sky, they split into 2 teams and chased after the 2 people. Damn it! The Celestial Emperor suddenly felt extremely depressed. At this point, he still could not kill little Yuya. This was really a great shame, because he was a Celestial Emperor. After so long, he still could not take down a quasi-emperor. If this news spread out, his reputation would be greatly damaged. Everyone would not see anything else. They would not see how difficult little Yuya was. They would only see that he failed and could not finish off little Yuya. And this was the original sin. But now, the heaven's retribution once again increased. Among the heaven's retribution that attacked, there were even Celestial Emperor-level experts. These were all Celestial Emperors of the past. The imprints that they left in the way of heaven were activated and awakened. All of them charged toward him. All of this forced him to retreat, wanting to retreat out of the range of the heaven's retribution. Suddenly, at this time, he found that little Yuya actually directly pounced on him and entangled him, preventing him from escaping. Damn it! How dare you use the heaven's retribution to entangle me? The Celestial Emperor had always looked gentle and refined. Everything was in his hands. But now he finally revealed a flustered and exasperated look. Since you want to interfere with my heaven's retribution, Then come and have a taste." Little Yu Ye's expression was extremely calm. She knew that this was her only chance of winning. "Madman, you really are a madman. Do you think that by entangling me here you will benefit? As long as you are targeted by the heaven's retribution, you will also die," the Celestial Emperor said exasperatedly. But before he could say anything, the Thunder Retribution Army that swept across the sky had already rushed in front of him. They actually surrounded him. The Thunder Retribution Army was more terrifying than the previous one. They surrounded him and besieged him. It was impossible to escape for a while. He also began to become embarrassed. The heavens' retribution was becoming more and more terrifying. It could pose a threat to the Celestial Emperor, and the Celestial Emperor was so embarrassed. Of course, little Yu Ye was not much better. If it were not for the protection of the Phoenix robe, she would not have been able to persist to this point. In front of him, there was also a Thunder Retribution Army. Among the Thunder Retribution Army, there were outstanding and invincible figures who looked down on their peers. Many people in the distance saw these figures and could not help but gasp, because they were all celestial emperors who had not achieved the way. The reason why they could recognize them was that many of them were even the great celestial emperors who existed in the present world. The Celestial Emperor Retribution was so terrifying. This made many old quasi-emperors feel cold sweat on their backs. Martial Emperor, that is a martial emperor. Suddenly someone shouted. Indeed, among those people, in the most central place, the appearance of a young man appeared. His power suppressed the world. Even among these celestial emperors who had not achieved the way, he was outstanding. He just stood with his hands behind his back. His pair of eyes stared coldly at little Yu Ye. There was no emotion in his eyes. But if it was not Yi Shiwen in his strongest state before he achieved the way, then who was it? Yi Shiwen vs. little Yu Ye. In the past, he had to face the test of countless ancestors to achieve the way with great difficulty. Now he had also become a tribulation to test the younger generation. Yi Shiwen, who was standing far away in the outer emperor's side city, had mixed feelings. Chapter 36:36. Seeing this scene, Yi Shiwen had mixed feelings in his heart, but he did not intervene because he knew that little Crescent Moon lived the most superior life since she was a child, because she was taken care of by him and several other emperors. She cultivated the best Taoist scriptures and obtained the best cultivation resources, but she also had to pay the price. She walked deeper and deeper on the road of other emperors, and she fell deeper and deeper, unable to extricate herself. Because every emperor was an extreme powerhouse. Only by walking out of their own path could they achieve the path. When the test of heaven's retribution ended, it depended on when she could walk out of her own path. Among these obstacles, as a father, he had the deepest influence on little Crescent Moon. Because of this, he was the first one to be defeated. Only by defeating his past self could little Crescent Moon, break free from these shackles, merge a few scriptures of the Great Path, and achieve the supreme Great Path. I have also become a roadblock. Yi Shiwen's mouth twitched slightly, and he thought with a wry smile. He could not help in this matter, and he could not help. This depended on little Crescent Moon herself. It could only depend on little Crescent Moon herself to break out of this situation. Every extreme powerhouse had to go through such a road, break the convention, break the rules and constraints of the predecessors, and finally achieve a unique self. In a sense, the transformation of quasi-emperor to emperor was greater than the transformation of emperor to heavenly master. From the beginning of the promotion to emperor, one would be the most unique person in the world. There is no one like me in the world. And obviously, little Crescent Moon had also seen her father in the crowd. It should be said that her father's imprint in the world had been revived, although it was certainly not comparable to the real body. At a certain time, to a certain extent, it was not the slightest bit inferior. This was an extremely difficult opponent. There were many who were ranked at the peak of the quasi-emperor period. Many of them were the first person in the same generation, the first person under the emperor, but there was never a more valuable person like Yi Shiwen, who was the world's first. Because many of the same generation and even the older generation who were suppressed by him at that time had achieved the path and achieved the supreme emperor's path. In other words, Yi Shiwen's title of the strongest person in the world was obtained by suppressing all the emperors. This added a lot of mystery and power to Yi Shiwen's legend. Even the Ice Emperor and many other emperors had once admitted that they were not Yi Shiwen's opponents, whether it was before or after attaining Tao. Yi Shiwen might have become an unprecedented and formidable existence if he had stayed in the myriad worlds of the heavens. How could Bian Xiaoye not be nervous in the face of Yi Shiwen? He was the strongest person below the emperor since the ancient times. She was also known as the strongest person below the emperor. But her reputation was far inferior compared to Yi Shiwen. However, she knew that she had no other choice. She'd inherited the inheritance of numerous imperial monarchs, and she'd cultivated in the Tao scriptures created by them. Now, she wanted to forge her own path, split open the heavens and the earth, and walk an unprecedented path that no one had taken before. So, she would naturally have to face the obstruction of these people. Not only her father, but several uncles, even her two mothers, and several other familiar figures had also appeared among these lightning troops. There were also some emperors that she'd only heard about in the ancient books, but had never seen before. They weren't as terrifying as her father when he was young. However, they were also extremely formidable existences. They weren't inferior to her at her peak. Those who were able to become emperors were the best among their peers. It was difficult for them to meet an opponent. Hiss, isn't that the dead emperor? There's also the Phoenix Ancestor, the Demon Master, the Demon Monarch, Emperor Mo, the Ice Emperor, the Yu clan, the original Demon Monarch. Many people counted the people who'd appeared one by one. Each of these names was once a famous existence in the myriad worlds of the heavens. Now, they'd all appeared one by one just to become a test for the younger generation. What an amazing lineup this was. However, although the other great emperors are also very strong, I still think that the martial emperor is stronger. Although he hasn't obtained it yet, the martial emperor is like a crane in a flock of chickens. He has the feeling of suppressing all heroes. I also have the same feeling. Although they all have the strength to be invincible among their peers, the martial emperor is the strongest among the experts. Since ancient times, even if all the experts below the emperor were to gather together, I'm afraid that he would still be the strongest. It's not that these great emperors are too weak, it's that the martial sovereign is too strong. Any one of these people can walk out of the river of time and easily kill all of us quasi-emperors. It's just that the strength of the martial sovereign has already surpassed the other great emperors. I was still young at that time, so I haven't seen the graceful bearing of the martial emperor. Now, with just the recovery of his imprint, I can already see some of his supreme bearing. He's really worthy of his legendary title. However, now he's going to face his own daughter. Even if the martial emperor comes back to life, he may not be able to deal with such a lineup. At this time, there was a lot of discussion in the Emperor city. They were shocked by the appearance of these young emperors. The feeling of these emperors coming out of the river of time and gathering in the same era was really too shocking. Even if they were only in their youth and hadn't achieved the way, they already had the supreme bearing in the future. There were more emperor level imprints surrounding the emperor of the Tian clan, but no one cared about it. Instead, they were shocked by the terrifying lineup that little Crescent Moon had to face. The way of heaven simply didn't give them a way out. Facing such a lineup, little Crescent Moon just smiled and said, "Since there's no way out, then we can only fight with all our strength. Kill." As she spoke, little Crescent Moon had already killed her way into the lightning tribulation. Those lightning people didn't have the emperor's imprint. But even if they didn't, they at least had the strength of quasi-emperor level. Only the way of heaven could form such an army of experts. Other forces, including the Tian clan, couldn't achieve such a level. The dark dragon halberd in her hand danced, and the terrifying power belonging to the Emperor Taoist tool was displayed. With a casual swing, the lightning people who couldn't dodge in time were all slashed. There was no way for them to recover. Even the imprint of the Way of Heaven was blasted and directly turned into pure energy, which was absorbed by Little Crescent Moon. This way of crossing the tribulation was very similar to how Yi Shiwen crossed the tribulation in the past. And the attacks of these lightning people all fell on Little Crescent Moon's body, but they couldn't break the phoenix robe on her body. The defensive power of the Emperor level Taoist tool was not something that these lightning people could break. This was also the biggest advantage she had. One for offense and one for defense. 2 Taoist tools to protect herself. She was even more extravagant than Yi Shiwen. Finally, she killed more and more, and those Emperor's imprints who stood at the back and didn't attack began to attack. The first to attack was Ice Emperor. He casually punched, and snowflakes scattered in the sky, about to freeze the entire void. The moment he made his move, he instantly became much stronger than the lightning troops. After Ice Emperor attacked, the other Emperor's imprints didn't attack. Obviously, they also maintained their status. At the same time, this was also a chance of survival given by the Way of Heaven. It would gradually strengthen and not swarm. If all these people attacked at the same time, even if Yi Shiwen was resurrected at that time, it would be difficult for him to survive, let alone Little Crescent Moon who was crossing the tribulation. She would definitely die. There was no chance of survival at all. This Ice Emperor was already arrogant when he was young. When he attacked, it was naturally completely different. Originally, the Lightning People army couldn't pose any threat to Little Crescent Moon. However, the Ice Empress was already able to threaten Little Crescent Moon. The flames on her phoenix robe had been frozen by the icy aura. This icy aura was so strong that it could freeze space itself. If the Ice Empress herself were to use it, this icy aura could even affect the River of Time. It was truly frightening. Although the phoenix robe was powerful, Little Crescent Moon was not an emperor after all. She couldn't exert 100% of its power and would still be restrained. The war broke out in an instant. Thousands of attacks broke out in an instant. Terrible waves swept across the sky, and everyone was dazzled. Only Yi Shiwen could see all the movements clearly, except for the Emperor of the sky. Towards the end of the war, Ice Emperor had been seriously injured several times. He was swept by the dark dragon halberd several times, and his body was cracked. Under normal circumstances, he would have been seriously injured, but he was condensed from heaven's retribution. So he became more and more courageous as he fought. And Little Crescent Moon's eyebrows were also stained with frost that was difficult to remove. But after all, she was in peak condition and had 2 Tao tools to protect her body. She had the upper hand and killed Ice Emperor in one fell swoop. But the moment when Ice Emperor was killed, another incomparably powerful Emperor joined the battle. It was the Demon King of the original Demon Clan. Compared to Ice Emperor, the Demon King of the original Demon Clan was even more terrifying. His body was simply invincible, and even if he dared to clash head-on with the Dark Dragon halberd, his arm would not be directly cut off. The war broke out even more intensely. Finally, the Demon King of the original Demon Clan showed signs of being dispirited. He was not a match for the Demon King, and cracks appeared on his body. But just when everyone thought that it would be the same battle as before with Ice Emperor, another great emperor joined the battle. It was the supreme sovereign of the underworld, Death King. Death King Yi Qianqian, who was dressed in light clothes, joined the battle with a treasured sword in her hand. Little Crescent Moon, who was originally able to gain the upper hand with ease, finally began to show signs of being at a disadvantage. Under the attacks of the 2 young emperors, she was repeatedly defeated. When Little Crescent Moon finally pulled out and killed the Demon King of the original Demon King with his halberd, she was also stabbed by the Death King's treasured sword and suffered serious injuries. But Little Crescent Moon also seized the opportunity to cut the Death King in half with her halberd, and cut off the Emperor's imprint that the heavenly Tao had bestowed upon him. The battle had just reached its climax, and Little Crescent Moon had already killed 3 young Emperors in a row, displaying a shocking cultivation. Chapter 36-37. Little Crescent Moon's wounds were recovering at an alarming rate. The phoenix robe on her body had fused with the phoenix regeneration technique that she cultivated, speeding up her recovery. Without such a recovery ability, she would not have been able to last in such an unprecedented battle. Just as she severed the Death Lord's Empyrean Lord Mark, a few more Empyrean lords joined the battle. Yao Lord Mingdi and Yuyong also flew over. The heavenly Tao would not leave no chance of survival, but similarly, it would not let the person transcending the tribulation have an easy time. Empyrean lords were different from any previous stage. They were the pinnacle experts of the heaven and earth, transcending the restraints of the heaven and earth. An unprecedented battle erupted once again, this time against the attacks of the 3 young Empyrean lords. Little Crescent Moon clearly did not have it easy. Even though she was wearing an Empyrean Lord Tao artifact like the Phoenix robe, it was the first time that half her body was blasted apart. It was extremely tragic. Faced with such a situation, Yi Shiwen felt his heart ache. However, he did not take action because he knew that it was essential for Little Crescent Moon to walk her own path. Her mother, Dawn, had never had such ambitions in this aspect. Therefore, Yi Shiwen would not force Dawn to cultivate to the Empyrean Lord realm because it was impossible. Those who could reach the Empyrean Lord realm were all people with firm minds. Dawn clearly did not possess such an ability, but Little Crescent Moon was different. She wanted to walk her own path and become an extreme expert. Therefore, all of this was something she had to bear. Even if she was his daughter, she would not receive any special treatment in such matters. The battle was still intense. Everyone cast their eyes on it. Today, they would witness the birth of a future Empyrean Lord, or the fall of a famous expert. This was something that could not be predicted, especially the quasi-emperors. They were alarmed and excited when they saw the battles. They were alarmed because they might encounter such battles if they transcended the tribulation. And they were excited because they might be able to witness the birth of an Empyrean Lord. It would be extremely beneficial for them to open up their own path. The battle continued. Fighting 3 young Empyrean lords in one go had pushed Little Crescent Moon's potential to the extreme. Every attack could not be wrong. Every defense had to be done with all her might. If not, she might be beaten until she vomited blood or her body would explode. Everyone watched unblinkingly as Little Crescent killed one young sovereign emperor after another. The further she went, the more difficult it became. Although she had the Phoenix regeneration technique and the Phoenix robe, the characters she faced were all supreme characters who had left their immortal reputation for countless years. Even so, she was seriously injured many times. Even the situation where she was on the verge of death appeared. Finally, he arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. It's finally here. The strongest battle since ancient times is also a battle between father and daughter. Can she really defeat the martial emperor of that time? It's hard to say if she's at her peak, but I'm afraid she's not a match for her right now. She was already heavily injured when she killed those young monarchs. The final battle has begun. Yi Shiwen looked at the confrontation between his emperor imprint and Little Crescent Moon from afar. He didn't intervene. If it was him at that time, Little Crescent Moon definitely wouldn't have any chance of winning. In the past, he killed an emperor in the state of a quasi-emperor. Although it was an emperor in a seriously injured state, it was still an amazing feat, however. The heavenly way still left a way out. He only had the power at that time. In fact, Yi Shiwen's combat power at that time was not only that. He also had a Tao tool in his hand. His combat power was more than a little stronger. But even so, this battle would not be easy for Little Crescent Moon. It was estimated that it would be another life and death battle. If she passed, her future would be bright. If she failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, this was what she had to face. With her own bloodline and inheritance, her cultivation was exceptionally smooth. Now it was time to repay the debt. Little Crescent Moon smiled slightly. Her breathing was rapid. She was fighting for time to recover. She knew that the opponent she would face this time was different from the previous young emperor. He was the strongest quasi-emperor in history. He was also the source of her bloodline. But at this time, she was more confident than before the battle. She had a variety of peerless Taoist scriptures. Any one of them would be a supreme inheritance that countless people would fight for in the outside world. But these inheritances were concentrated in her. Before she obtained the Tao, they would be her help. But if she wanted to become an emperor, they would become her obstacles, preventing her from walking out of her own Tao. Because she had cultivated too much, the calamity she had to face was more terrifying than the ordinary emperor. Now, one by one, she was cutting down the obstacles in front of her. Now it was finally the last moment. Every time she cut down one by one, she would become stronger. Boom! The battle between the two finally broke out. As soon as Yi Shiwen's emperor imprint appeared, he displayed a completely different fighting method from the other emperors. The 3,000 martial arts allowed him to completely burst out his peak combat power. He was invincible in a one-on-one battle. Even if he faced a group battle, it was no problem. Little Crescent Moon was suddenly surrounded by the 3,000 martial arts. It was as if she was surrounded by 3,000 young emperors. What a terrifying method! I've heard of it. It's the 3,000 martial arts, said a quasi-emperor trembling. Yi Shiwen had not left for long. Tens of thousands of years could be said to be long, but it could also be said to be short. It was only the time of one generation. Therefore, many people had heard of Yi Shiwen's methods. This method, for them, was simply in defiance of the natural order. Little Crescent Moon was not unfamiliar with this method. She was very clear that in the depths of the divine court, there was actually a handwritten letter from Yi Shiwen. It recorded the cultivation methods of the 3,000 martial arts. But so far, no one could practice it except Yi Shiwen. It was extremely amazing to practice any of the 3,000 martial arts to the extreme. It could even be said that one had the qualifications to become an emperor, not to mention so many. To practice at the same time, the difficulty was unimaginable. The time and resources consumed were unimaginable. The resources could still be provided by the power of the divine court, but the time needed was not something that anyone could afford. Even the two mothers who had already attained the Tao had once studied the cultivation methods of these 3,000 martial Taoists. According to what they said, if they were to abandon their cultivation and recultivate without considering the possibility of failure, it would still take tens of millions of years before they could cultivate each martial Tao to the extreme and reach the imperial lord realm. They did not know how Yi Shiwen did it. It was simply impossible. In the end, they could only conclude that he was a rare genius. Only then could he achieve such a shocking level. She was not unfamiliar with the 3,000 martial arts, but it was the first time she saw it with her own eyes. But she could feel the horror of the 3,000 martial arts at the beginning. 3,000 Yi Shiwen attacked at the same time, each with a method, enough to defeat an army, invincible among the same rank. Seeing the methods of the 3,000 martial arts, the emperor of the divine clan was extremely shocked. He could naturally see the horror of this method. It did not seem to exist in the human world at all. It was impossible for anyone to practice this method, but he did it. Fortunately, this person has left and went to that place. Otherwise, he will inevitably become an obstacle to the divine clan's reunification of the world. Although the return of the divine clan this time was unstoppable, and no one could stop it, but with such a character, they did not know how much they would have to pay to take down Yi Shiwen. He could only defend with all his strength now. At the same time, the lightning people besieging him were not quasi-emperors, but real emperor imprints. Although they were not his opponent, there were many of them, and they still posed a terrible threat. Now the heaven's retribution was mainly to test Little Crescent Moon, so he did not dare to come out. He knew that the most critical time was to wait until the winner was decided. It was nothing if Little Crescent Moon lost, but if she won, then it would be time for him to make a move. Boom! Poochie! Boom! All kinds of collisions between the two sides broke out. The confrontation between the Great Path and the Great Path. In the beginning, Yi Shiwen's imprints on Little Crescent Moon were still very serious. But as time passed, Little Crescent Moon cut off more and more of Yi Shiwen's 3,000 martial arts. Her Tao gradually became clearer and stronger. Her aura gradually weakened. She was seriously injured by Yi Shiwen's 3,000 martial arts many times, but her Tao gradually became clearer and stronger. Finally, the 3,000 martial arts were cut off. Little Crescent Moon, who was holding the dark dragon halberd, finally arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. At this time, her body was already dripping with blood. She was constantly panting, and her eyes were gradually blurred. It was the last moment of the battle, and at this time, it was Yi Shiwen's time to make a move. Compared to the 3,000 martial arts, his body was even more terrifying. He used all kinds of martial arts more casually. A simple finger as a sword was a peerless sword technique. But facing Little Crescent Moon, who persisted to the end, Yi Shiwen's last imprint was finally cut off. It was just that in the end, there was a huge cut on Little Crescent Moon's body. The heaven's retribution began to gradually fade. At this point in the battle, the heaven's retribution also finally passed. There was a cry of surprise in Emperor B City. Finally, the heaven's retribution passed. Was another emperor about to be born? Suddenly, at this time, the emperor of the Tian clan, who had been plotting on the side for a long time, finally made a move. At this time, Little Crescent Moon had just passed the heaven's retribution and was at her weakest. She was simply unable to resist the sneak attack of another emperor. In a flash, there was a cold snort in the universe. The emperor of the Tian clan stumbled and fell down as if he had suffered a heavy blow. He clutched his chest and coughed out a mouthful of old blood. His eyes widened in disbelief. How is this possible? Chapter 30, 638. That Tian clan imperial monarch widened his eyes in disbelief. He didn't feel any attacks from any divine abilities or laws. It was just a cold snort, yet he felt as if he had suffered a heavy blow. What kind of terrifying existence was this? One had to know that he was a god emperor. Forget about the heaven race. Even in the entire universe, he was one of the top figures. He was high up above everyone else. Just a cold snort was enough to injure him severely. Such a person did not exist at all. There were only so many emperors in the universe. Although the number was not small, compared to the First and Second War of Resistance, the quality was much worse. At that time, not only were there many emperors, but they were also stronger. There were many 7th and 8th realm emperors. At that time, the myriad heavens and myriad realms would be able to fight the celestial race to a standstill. But now, although there were many emperor monarchs, they had only become emperor monarchs in the past tens of thousands of years. Most of them were only at the 2nd or 3rd realm. In the universe, there was no existence that could injure him so easily. Little Crescent Moon, who was in front of him, was also stunned. She had been prepared to receive a heavy blow from the Celestial Emperor, but who knew that the Celestial Emperor would suddenly stumble and fall to the ground. She could not understand. The Celestial Emperor was very strong. Even if she passed through her weakest state, she was still not his match. She could only rely on the Emperor B City to defend. But now he was seriously injured in front of her. This was not some crafty plot. Against the current her, the other party did not need to use such crafty plots. Who is it? The Celestial Emperor's body burst out with divine splendor like rain, turning into a protective shield to protect himself. Around him, a domain was completely unfolded. Just now he felt that he was ambushed. Now he was fully protected and would not be ambushed by others. Humph! Just as the Celestial Emperor's voice fell, another cold snort was heard. Then, the Celestial Emperor let out another groan. His entire body was sent flying. He spat out a mouthful of old blood. His body was covered with dense cracks and blood spurted out. It was as if he had suffered a heavy blow. If it was an accident just now, then it was clear to everyone now. Everyone could feel cold sweat trickling down their backs. It was just a cold snort, and yet it possessed such might. That person was none other than a top-notch sovereign emperor in the myriad of worlds. In the end, he was unable to retaliate at all. It was as if he had been punched by an expert of the same level. Everyone's gazes wandered around, searching everywhere, as if they wanted to find that person, even though they knew it might be futile. At that moment, a figure slowly appeared before the crowd. When the crowd saw this figure, they all rubbed their eyes in disbelief. The person they saw was none other than the martial emperor who had just appeared in the heavenly tribulation. This is a martial emperor. Tens of thousands of years had passed, and the martial emperor from back then had already become a legend. No one knew where he went, and no one knew if he was still alive or not. Could it be that the imprint left behind by a martial emperor has manifested? Everyone looked towards the void. This was the most likely possibility. However, the figure seemed to have no trace of worldly aura, just standing in the universe. Little Crescent Moon looked at the figure in front of her. She was no stranger to him. After tens of thousands of years, she had also grown from a little baby to a young girl, but Yi Shiwen had not changed at all. It was still the same, exactly the same as the painting, just that it appeared even more elegant and transcendent, even more profound. She still had memories of Yi Shiwen in her mind. Her bloodline was extraordinary, and she had the ability to remember since birth. Although she was just a baby, she still remembered everything clearly. That was the happiest memory she had hidden in the bottom of her heart all these years. Every time she felt that she could not hold on, she would take it out to have a look. Her father was watching from afar, supporting her. However, when the figure appeared in front of her, she almost suspected that she had seen wrongly. However, she quickly reacted. This was not fireworks, nor was it the manifestation of a spirit or imprint. What kind of spirit or imprint could be so strong? Moreover, after crossing the heaven's retribution, her body was rapidly transforming into the physique of a sovereign lord while recovering from her injuries at an accelerated speed. Countless rules were added to her body, and her life source was transforming. She had the magic eyes that could see through everything. Naturally, she could see that the figure in front of her was definitely not fake. "Daddy." Little Crescent Moon suddenly hugged the figure in front of her, as if she was afraid that he would suddenly disappear. At this time, the dignity of a sovereign lord and the state of mind had all disappeared without a trace, and were thrown to the back of her mind. 2 lines of clear tears fell almost without warning. She had been extraordinary since she was young, and had never really cried before. However, she could not stop now. Yi Shiwen had a gratified smile on his face. Little Crescent Moon finally cut off her imprint, and finally became a sovereign lord. The little one in his memory had now grown into a young girl. Her figure was tall, and she had already reached Yi Shiwen's chin. Yi Shiwen gently patted Little Crescent Moon's back, and the smile on his face was incomparably brilliant. "All right, you've become a sovereign lord, and you're also a character. Why are you still crying like this? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by others? They dare." Little Crescent Moon curled her lips and said. However, she eventually stopped, and the tear stains on her face automatically disappeared. In the Emperor city, naturally, no one dared to laugh at Little Crescent Moon. She was a dignified sovereign lord. Unless they didn't want to live, they could die with just a thought. Moreover, they could also understand that it was inevitable for a father and daughter to cry tears of joy after being separated for tens of thousands of years. They had also seen Little Crescent Moon's determination before. She didn't give in at all in the face of so many sovereign lords and killed countless powerhouses since ancient times. If it were them, how could they do it? After comforting little Crescent Moon, Yi Shiwen looked at the sovereign lord of the Tian clan. At this moment, the sovereign lord of the Tian clan still had a completely inconceivable look on his face. Martial Emperor. He spat out these two words. From the beginning to the end, he had never thought that a martial emperor would appear. Everyone knew that a martial emperor had gone to the path of good fortune. Others didn't know the dangers of the path of good fortune, but he still knew a little. Not to mention a martial emperor. Since ancient times, no sovereign lord who was stronger than him had returned from the path of good fortune. How could a martial emperor return? This in itself was illogical. Moreover, even if a martial emperor had returned, he wouldn't have cared. A martial emperor had only attained the Tao for tens of thousands of years. At most, his cultivation would be at the 4th or 5th realm. Even so, he had already advanced by leaps and bounds. He really wasn't afraid of such a martial emperor. A fully grown martial emperor might be terrifying, but he also needed that opportunity and that time. However, as soon as a martial emperor returned, he completely showed his strength. A cold snort was enough to seriously injure him. These things sounded like a fantasy story. It was simply unbelievable. However, it still happened. One could imagine how shocked he was now. At this moment, it wasn't just this sovereign lord of the Tian clan who was shocked. Even the Tian clan's army was shocked. Originally, they thought that victory was in their grasp. Their side even dispatched a veteran sovereign lord who could capture Little Crescent Moon in one fell swoop and use her to deter the divine court. In order to achieve this step, they didn't know how much preparation they had made. They isolated the news and even sent people to delay the actions of the divine court. It should have been in the bag, but now there was a series of mistakes. In reality, Little Crescent Moon had attained the Tao in front of everyone, and then the legendary martial emperor had appeared. Among the Tian clan's army, many of them had participated in the war tens of thousands of years ago. In that war, they still remembered the supreme elegance that Yi Shiwen had displayed until now. He almost destroyed the entire Tian clan's army with his own strength and resealed the Tian clan, who was about to break through the seal with great difficulty. It could be said that he was an unparalleled enemy of the Tian clan. Although it wasn't the first time that the Tian clan was sealed and exiled, there was only martial Emperor Yi Shiwen who could achieve this with his own strength since ancient times. And now, when the celestial race was at its peak, this great enemy had returned. Thinking of this, many people began to feel a chill on their backs. They also understood that Yi Shiwen might not be as invincible as he was in the past when facing the celestial race with all the emperor monarchs. However, the shadow caused by that time was unforgettable. Are you really a martial emperor? This sovereign lord of the Tian clan stared at Yi Shiwen and almost roared. I don't believe it. How many years have passed? How could you grow to this level? Whether I am a martial emperor or not, do I need you to believe it? Yi Shiwen said with a sneer. Back then, I gave you a way out. I didn't kill you all. I didn't expect that there would be future troubles. Tell me, how did you come out? I want to know who can break the seal that I left back then. Yi Shiwen's cultivation was far from what it was now when he had left behind the seal. He had just stepped into the emperor realm. However, he had added the seal on the basis of countless seals left behind by his predecessors. It could be said that the seal was completed by gathering the power of many emperor realm experts from ancient times to the present. In order to avoid accidents, he even left a barrier against the heavens and realms. Even the sovereign lords of the heavens and realms would find it difficult to break the seal. However, the Tian clan still came out. Yi Shiwen was very interested in the reason behind it. Chapter 30, 639. Martial Emperor, don't be too confident. You did seal us in the past, but the current situation is completely different from the past. Do you think you can still turn the tide like you did in the past? The Emperor stared at Yi Shiwen and said, Don't say? Then die. Yi Shiwen just waved his hand, and the Emperor's eyes suddenly widened. His head suddenly fell down, and not even a drop of blood flowed out. His spirit was also annihilated in an instant, and the Emperor's corpse was also grabbed by Yi Shiwen. A raging fire rose in his hand, and the dignified Emperor was refined into a puppet in just a moment. Then it turned into a group of light and entered Emperor Beast City. This Emperor Monarch-level puppet would become the guardian of the Emperor Beast City. It could protect the Emperor Beast City in the absence of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's statue alone looked good, but it couldn't stop the Emperor Monarch. However, with this Emperor-level puppet, it could contend against the Emperor-level masters and protect Emperor Beast City from being captured. All of this took a long time to describe, but it was over in just a moment. A powerful Emperor couldn't even withstand one move from Yi Shiwen and was beheaded. Everyone held their breath. An entire universe quieted down. Countless pairs of eyes looked at Yi Shiwen, as if they were looking at a myth, a legend. Originally, they knew that the legendary Martial Emperor was very strong, but the Martial Emperor didn't seem to be strong to this extent at that time. He could casually kill an Emperor. What did he obtain behind the legendary Gate of Good Fortune? Why had no one been able to come back from behind that gate since ancient times? But he was able to come back from it. In the end, what was hidden in it? Many questions emerged in their minds, but no one dared to go up and ask. Even now, thinking about the matchless divine power that Yi Shiwen had displayed, they felt incomparably shocked. Little Moon was also shocked. She was already Emperor-level figure, but after entering the Emperor realm, she became increasingly aware of the gap between herself and this Emperor of Tian clan. Originally, when she hadn't entered the Imperial Monarch realm, she only felt that it was impossible for her to go against him, nor was she able to sense exactly how great the gap between them was. Now that she truly stood at the same major realm, she finally understood how great the gap between them was, and it was even difficult for her to protect herself. He was definitely an expert among Emperor Lords. However, this Celestial Emperor Lord couldn't even block a single move from his father. How strong could his father be? He simply didn't dare to imagine. She was no longer an ignorant little girl. A sovereign emperor was already a top-notch figure in the universe. Naturally, she understood the difference between them. However, this was nothing for Yi Shiwen. After all, he was just a mere Emperor Lord. He could kill him with a single word. The Emperor Lord had unleashed the Great Way law to the limit. However, he had already surpassed this limit. Therefore, they were not on the same level at all. If the Celestial Empyrean Lord wanted to say it, then so be it. If he didn't want to say it, then so be it. In the face of absolute strength, all sorts of schemes and plots were useless. However, when he attacked just now, he faintly felt the suppression of the heavenly Tao. In the universe, the appearance of heavenly Tao was not allowed at all. The heavenly Tao of the universe was much weaker than that of the Fortune God dynasty. It was also not as perfect, so naturally there was no way to nurture a heavenly Tao. The existence of a heavenly master like Yi Shiwen was enough to smash the entire heavens and myriad worlds into pieces. No one could stop him. Therefore, Yi Shiwen couldn't display his full strength here, unless he intended to enter a state of complete confrontation with the heavenly Tao of the universe. That would be extremely disadvantageous to him. Although the heavenly Tao of the universe was not as strong as that of the Fortune God dynasty, it was still very powerful. If he fell into a stalemate, Yi Shiwen wouldn't feel good. He might even suffer the backlash of the heavenly Tao. It was simply too stupid to fight against the heavenly Tao that represented countless living beings in the universe with the strength of a single person. However, it didn't matter to him. Against those Celestial Empyrean Lords, he didn't need to use his full strength to kill them. However, the sudden change of the celestial race made him a little vigilant. It seemed that it was time to go to the sealed land again and seal the celestial race again. His gaze swept over the celestial race army. When the celestial race army saw Yi Shiwen's gaze sweeping over, they immediately felt as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Some even collapsed. They frantically fled into the distance. However, how could they escape in front of Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen didn't make any movements. He simply waved his hand, and a shocking scene unfolded in front of them. Everyone would never forget this scene in their lifetime. The tens of millions of soldiers, the elite army of the celestial race, and the various subsidiary races had completely collapsed in front of everyone. Yes, they had collapsed. It was as if a force had swept over from the horizon. The celestial race army that was swept away didn't even have time to scream before they turned into ashes. Their bodies decomposed, turned into atoms, and collapsed on the spot. There was no blood, nor was there any magnificent scene. It was just that their bodies had collapsed and turned into the most basic atoms. All the elite masters in Emperor City stared with their eyes wide open. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, and if someone had told them that there was such a terrifying scene, they wouldn't have believed it even if they were beaten to death. With just a wave of his hand, the tens of millions of soldiers had completely turned into nothingness. There was no power more terrifying than this. In front of this power, they were too insignificant. What was the difference between them and ants? If they joined forces with the Emperor Lords and used various means, they might be able to fight. But what about facing Yi Shiwen, who had such power? How could they have the idea of resisting? They didn't know that there was a heavenly master above the Emperor Lords, but they could understand how powerful and terrifying Yi Shiwen was at this moment. One thought to create a world. One thought to destroy a world. Seeing Yi Shiwen with such divine might, many people in Emperor City began to get excited, especially many people who had come to Emperor City. They were Yi Shiwen's admirers and had come here to make a pilgrimage. Originally, they wanted to admire Yi Shiwen's ruins, but now they could see the real person in front of them. How could they not be excited? Some of the faster ones had already prostrated on the ground and paid their respects. This wasn't only because Yi Shiwen's cultivation was terrifying, but more importantly, he had done many good deeds for the heavens and the 10,000 worlds. Everyone was still benefiting from this day. Yi Shiwen waved his hand, and divine splendor scattered from the gaps of his fingers. It fell on Emperor City like a rain of light, and fell into the bodies of the creatures in Emperor City. Suddenly, these experts and elites found that their injuries had been completely healed under this rain of light. Some of their old injuries couldn't be healed, but now they were completely healed. Some people felt that their originally extremely solid breakthrough barrier had also disappeared. They could naturally make a breakthrough in their cultivation as long as they were in closed-door training for a period of time. They were immediately surprised and happy. They naturally understood that these were all bestowed by Yi Shiwen. They knelt down and shouted loudly, "Thank you, Martial Emperor, for the reward." "Long live the Martial Emperor!" All kinds of shouts formed a sound wave in the entire Emperor City, and each wave was louder than the previous one. Yi Shiwen nodded with satisfaction. For them, this was undoubtedly a blessing from the heavens. However, for Yi Shiwen, it was just a little effort. It was nothing at all. At this time, little Crescent Moon, who was next to him, had almost recovered. As long as no one disturbed, the recovery ability of the Emperor realm was still very amazing. Although it couldn't be compared to the Heavenly Master, it was still far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Yi Shiwen then asked Little Crescent Moon about the situation of the 10,000 worlds and the subsequent changes of the Heavenly Clan. Little Crescent Moon then opened her mouth and told Yi Shiwen. After Yi Shiwen left, the overall situation of the 10,000 worlds and the heavens was still relatively stable. Although 2 or 3 people had achieved the Tao after he left, the overall situation was still relatively stable. It wasn't like the endless battles when there were many Emperor realm lords in power. It should be said that the team left behind by Yi Shiwen was too tyrannical. There were 5 emperors who were related to Yi Shiwen and stood together at the critical moment. The others had more or less received favors from Yi Shiwen. Under such circumstances, how could any war break out again? Basically, they divided up an area and developed separately. Most of the time, they also spent in close cultivation. The situation of the entire 10,000 worlds and the heavens was considered stable. Because of the previous chaos of the heavenly clan, the 10,000 worlds and the heavens suffered a lot. At this time, it was the time to silently lick the wounds. Naturally, there was no mood to fight. Moreover, if they really fought, the other Emperor Realm Lords might not be the opponents of Emperor Mo, Monster Lord, and others. However, all of this changed 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the celestial race suddenly broke the seal without any warning. This was something that no one had expected. Over the years, the great emperors had been constantly sweeping away the remnants of the celestial race. Even if there was a little remnant of the celestial race, it was not enough to break the seal left by Yishiwen. That was because the seal was reinforced by the emperors, including Yishiwen. Yemo and others who were in power later also went to reinforce it. Even if the seal might gradually weaken with the passage of time, it was definitely not now. Therefore, in everyone's opinion, the heavenly clan might not appear again in their lifetime. Counting it, it was already the third war against the heavens. However, no one would have thought that the fourth battle against the heavens would occur without any warning. The Tian clan army broke through the seal with lightning speed and captured the sealed grounds. The elites stationed in the sealed grounds were all annihilated, and not a single one of them managed to escape. Then these Emperor Realm Lords broke the seal one after another and led the army to sweep the world. The entire 10,000 worlds and the heavens fell into their iron hooves. Chapter 3640. Because the appearance of the heavenly clan was too sudden, the myriad heavens was not prepared at all. They were defeated again and again. More than half of the myriad heavens was occupied. Countless races and regions surrendered under the iron hooves of the heavenly clan. At this time, everyone finally recalled the horror brought by the previous heavenly clan invasions. But it was too late. The heavenly clan reappeared at this time was different from the last time. At that time, they relied on the remnants of the heavenly clan to stir up trouble. In the end, only one emperor who had just achieved Tao was killed by Yishiwen. And this time, several celestial race monarchs had reappeared. Among them, there were even many high-level monarchs. Even the monarchs from the first war of resistance against the heavens were still alive. This wasn't something that the myriad heavens and myriad worlds could contend against. Fortunately, the emperors of the myriad heavens had ruled for many years. Their foundation was deeper, and they could still hold on. But it was also because of this that Little Moon Tooth quietly came to Emperor City to see if there was a chance to break through to the Emperor realm. Now she was known as the first quasi-emperor. She was the strongest among the many quasi-emperors. If someone could break through to the Emperor realm, then she had the highest probability. And if she could break through to the Emperor realm, it would undoubtedly increase the odds of the myriad heavens, who knew that the news was leaked in the end, and it attracted the heavenly clan army just to capture her. Yishiwen also understood from Little Crescent Moon's side that the heavenly race had suddenly broken out of the seal. Perhaps the entire heavens and myriad realms didn't know the reason behind it. Currently, the entire heavens and myriad realms didn't have the ability to counterattack the sealed area. They could only barely protect themselves. It was not that no one tried to go to the seal. Emperor Mo of the Divine Court had returned. But before he could get close, he encountered the Emperor of the Heavenly Clan. After the final battle, he returned with serious injuries. After that, the masters of the myriad heavens understood that the seal had become a dangerous place. There was no way to enter. Daddy, the Heavenly Clan is coming aggressively now. I'm afraid the situation is not good. Fortunately, Daddy is back, said Little Moon Tooth with a smile. After seeing Yishiwen again, the smile on her face never stopped. This made many people's eyes widen. Perhaps in the past 10,000 years, she did not smile as much as today. No worries with me here. the Tian clan won't be able to do anything. Yi Shiwen said plainly, it would have been fine if he hadn't returned, but since he had returned, then the situation wouldn't be any worse. Little Crescent Moon nodded her head vigorously, no different from a little girl. Since Daddy is back, let's go back. Mommy and the others, as well as Uncle Emperor Mo, Uncle Demon Lord, and Uncle Demon Master, will be overjoyed if they know that Daddy is back. Little Crescent Moon quickly said, all right. Yi Shiwen's yearning was also very heavy, so he naturally wouldn't refuse this time. However, after looking into the depths of the universe for a while, his eyebrows couldn't help but knit together and said, looks like these Tian clan people really don't want to give up. In the depths of his eyes, the divine palace standing in the universe had been surrounded by countless Tian clan troops. After tens of thousands of years of construction, the Tian clan was no longer as simple and crude as it was at the beginning. It could be said that it truly possessed the style of an immortal inheritance. With the Wu heaven that Yi Shiwen first created as the core, the space and half-planes extended out, almost comparable to a small world. In every space and half-plane, there were elite divine palace troops rushing out, relying on the arrays and enchantments to resist the Tian clan army. One by one, the war fortresses were pushed out from their hidden state, slowly revealing their huge planet-like bodies. Thick rainbow light swept out, directly sweeping into the Tian clan army. Every attack would turn thousands of Tian clan army into ashes, but it still couldn't stop the madness of the Tian clan army, and they continued to crazily attack. One by one, the war beasts that were raised in captivity launched war tramples. It was unknown how many Tian clan troops were trampled to death, but it also attracted the counterattack of many Tian clan experts. Huge war beasts fell one after another, floating in the universe, setting off this war even more bloody and terrifying. And this was only a corner of the entire battlefield. There were terrifying collisions everywhere. Father, what's wrong? Little Crescent Moon asked. She was still immersed in the excitement of reuniting with her father, and suddenly noticed that Yi Shiwen was frowning and quickly asked, see for yourself. Yi Shiwen waved his hand, and suddenly the scene that was separated by more than half of the universe appeared in the entire Emperor City. Is that the Divine Palace? The Tian clan is finally attacking the Divine Palace. Someone in the Emperor City cried out in alarm. The Tian clan army was mobilizing troops to attack the Divine Palace in one fell swoop. This itself was not a secret, because the Divine Palace was the core of the entire heavens. Although the other emperors had established their own forces, most of them were more or less related to the Divine Palace. Therefore, in these years of war, the Divine Palace had always played the role of a mediator. If the entire Divine Palace was captured in one fell swoop, then the entire heavens would fall into a stage of a group of dragons without a leader, apart from the Divine Palace. Who else could have the prestige and strength to lead the masses? Obviously, that was not realistic. The Tian clan obviously knew about this as well. They had been mobilizing their troops the entire time, and they didn't hide anything at all. It was clear that they wanted to use this power to suppress the 10,000 worlds and capture the Divine Palace with lightning speed. This was something that could only happen when they had an absolute advantage. They were not afraid of any tricks, because no matter what tricks they played, it was impossible to escape their palms. Thus, the people in Emperor City did not find it strange. But when they saw the celestial race attack Divine Court, they still cried out in alarm, because they knew very well what it meant for the 10,000 worlds if Divine Court fell. However, they quickly reacted. If they were still worried before, it seemed that there was nothing to be afraid of now, because the supreme ruler in their hearts, the martial emperor, had returned. Previously, Yi Shiwen had almost casually dealt with the terrifying means and strength of an emperor. This also made them full of confidence for the future. How could the Tian clan be the opponent of the martial emperor? Not good. This is only a part of the Tian clan's army. Their real target is the Divine Palace and its Uncle Emperor Mo. Little Yuya quickly said at this time. Uncle Emperor Mo was seriously injured when he went to explore the sealed area. He hasn't recovered yet. They must want to seize this time to attack and catch Uncle Emperor Mo unprepared. Yi Shiwen's eyes flashed with a bit of appreciation. He had thought of the same thing just now. If he was the decision-maker of the Tian clan, he would definitely make the same choice. If he was not strong enough, then he would swallow a part of the opponent first and complete the nibbling step by step. However, if he had the absolute advantage, then he would capture the leader first and swallow the whole in one gulp was the way of the king. Little Yuya could think of this at once. Her growth in these years was indeed very amazing. Yi Shiwen was very gratified that she could reach this point, especially since he couldn't accompany his wife and daughter for the past tens of thousands of years. At this time, the entire Emperor city was boiling with excitement. It was almost a real-time live broadcast. This kind of blood-boiling scene made many people in the Emperor city unable to hold back. Yi Shiwen himself was a legend. Tens of thousands of years ago, he had led the heavens and the 10,000 worlds to beat the entire Tian clan back to the other side of the sealed area. And now Yi Shiwen had returned. They had the opportunity to follow the legendary character of that year to experience a great war again. They could open up a legend and myth that they could boast about with their descendants. Yi Shiwen looked at them and flew above the Emperor city. He said, "Who is willing to go to the Divine Palace with me? Come out." Yi Shiwen raised his arm and shouted. Almost half of the people in the Emperor city flew out at once. The remaining half didn't come out. It wasn't because they didn't want to follow Yi Shiwen to the battle, but because they were the descendants of the guardians of the Emperor city. They had already become the local natives for tens of thousands of years. However, their strength was much worse. In a war of this level, they couldn't even serve as cannon fodder. They couldn't even cross the universe. Suddenly, the army came out. Many of them were elites and soldiers. So, they quickly formed a military formation. Everything was done in a short period of time. These were the elites of the elites, the masters of the masters. Little Crescent Moon looked at Yi Shiwen. At this time, she seemed to understand the gap between her and her father. Yi Shiwen casually raised his arm and shouted and made people's blood boil. He attracted countless followers. This was a charm that even she didn't have. "Let's go to the Divine Palace with me. Let those little bastards of the Tian clan see that there are people in our 10,000 worlds. We won't allow them to be presumptuous." Yi Shiwen's voice was calm, mellow, and full of magnetism, but it made everyone's blood boil. They couldn't wait to fight to the death with the Tian clan. He had commanded the 10,000 worlds for tens of thousands of years. He had also tempered himself in the Fortune God dynasty for tens of thousands of years. It was unknown how many times he had experienced such a big battle. So, it wasn't difficult for him to command hundreds of billions of troops. Under his command, this temporarily organized army had already flown in the direction of the Divine Palace. Yi Shiwen didn't know how long it would take for this army to cross more than half of the universe. However, Yi Shiwen didn't have that kind of patience. The Divine Palace also couldn't wait. So, Yi Shiwen simply waved his hand, and each of them transformed into a pair of devil wings. This way, the speed of the entire army was much faster. They flew in the direction of the Divine Palace as fast as lightning. Yi Shiwen and Little Crescent Moon were in the middle of the army's formation. Their eyes were cold as they looked in the direction of the Divine Palace. Chapter 36:41. With Yi Shiwen's strength, he could easily cross more than half of the universe. However, what he wanted to do wasn't that simple. In the eyes of others, the return of the celestial race was like the end of the world. However, for him, it was just a trivial matter. If he didn't come back, it would be a big deal. However, since he came back, it was just a trivial matter. This was a good opportunity to hone the elites and experts of Divine Court. Therefore, he wasn't anxious. The celestial race army besieging Divine Court seemed to be a very urgent matter. However, Divine Court had a foundation laid by him. Moreover, it was managed by Yemo for many years. There was no lack of various enchantments and formations for defense. Even if the celestial race sent an emperor, it would be impossible for them to break through Divine Court in a short time. Therefore, he wasn't anxious. This majestic army that came from the Emperor Beast City traversed across the cosmos, startling the races in the nearby universe. Such a majestic army was enough to flatten a world and wipe out an entire race. However, as the army passed, the news of the Martial Emperor's return also spread to the vast universe. At first, these races couldn't believe it, because the Martial Emperor, like many emperors in the past, had broken the gate of fortune and entered an unknown place. However, since ancient times, so many emperors had entered, but no one had ever returned. This was the first time the Martial Emperor had returned. Therefore, they didn't believe this news. However, as more news came, especially that the Martial Emperor had casually killed a celestial race emperor and annihilated the celestial race army with a wave of his hand. This was not some historical novel, nor was it some exaggerated adjective, but the truth. With just a wave of his hand, the Tian clan army had been annihilated, and everyone who saw this scene would never forget that shocking scene. An army that was enough to conquer a world had been easily turned into ashes with a wave of his hand. Previously, someone had secretly recorded that scene. Very quickly, it spread to every region the army passed by. Everyone was shocked by that scene. They simply didn't dare to believe it. It wasn't that they hadn't seen emperors in action. Especially in recent years, the celestial race army had returned. The emperors of both sides had fought more than once or twice. Every time they fought, it could be said to be extremely terrifying. The laws covered the sky and the earth, destroying all armies. No one could withstand such a war. However, Yi Shiwen's cold snort was enough to seriously injure an emperor. The terror of annihilating the entire celestial race army with a wave of his hand still deeply shocked them. After witnessing this scene, many legends regarding the path of creation suddenly popped up again. There had to be many impressive things inside. Otherwise, it would not have attracted countless emperors throughout the ages to head to the path of creation. It was just that no one had ever returned from there, and there were even many terrifying legends about it. That was why the path of creation was shrouded in a layer of mystery. Was it a dangerous place that had existed since ancient times, or was it a place with great fortune? No one knew, but now that Yi Shiwen had returned, it seemed to prove that it might not be an ominous place. Didn't they see that Yi Shiwen had already returned? Of the world. Possible. He Emperor Yi of that. Of the legendary. He of the legendary of the world and had. Of Emperor of world. Tens of thousands of years ago, when the Martial Emperor had just left, he was already invincible. However, he wasn't as terrifying as he was now. The emperors he killed in the past were defeated after going through great battles. They weren't killed so easily. For a time, the discussion about the Land of Fortune was in an uproar. However, compared to the discussion about the Land of Fortune, the Gate of Fortune and the Road of Fortune, the Martial Emperor had already returned. He had displayed amazing strength. This would definitely have a huge impact on the situation of the entire universe. Originally, the universe was retreating in defeat against the celestial race. They couldn't resist at all. However, with Yi Shiwen's participation, the situation was completely different from before. In particular, Yi Shiwen's dreadful battle prowess that could easily behead an Emperor realm expert had given the All Heavens realm side a huge bargaining chip. The scales of victory and defeat had begun to tilt towards the All Heavens realm side. This also caused many races who originally wanted to rely on the Heavenly Clan to have different thoughts. This time, the Heavenly Clan had made a comeback, and it was different from any of the previous times. Furthermore, the strength of the myriad heavens realms could not be considered to be at its peak. It could be said that they were being beaten back step by step. They were only relying on the support of the emperors to barely resist. Therefore, they inevitably had the idea of relying on the celestial race. However, with Yi Shiwen's return, they felt that maybe they could wait and see. This was the influence of Yi Shiwen, the hero of the last war. Yi Shiwen naturally didn't know the secret activities of these races. For him, there was no need to know it all. Those who dared to betray the universe would only face death. At this time, the battle in the Divine Palace had already entered its most intense stage. The entire Tian clan army had already broken through the first line of defense of the Divine Palace with lightning speed. Although there were many enchantments and formations on this line of defense, and there were even many defensive divine artifacts resisting, the resistance was extremely intense. However, whenever there was a point that they could not break through, there would always be a Tian clan emperor who would take action. And no matter how fierce the resistance of this defensive node was, it was impossible to resist the attack of the emperors of the celestial race. It was always broken through very quickly. Therefore, the first line of defense of the Divine Palace was broken through very quickly. There were countless casualties in the Divine Palace, but at this time the elites of the Divine Palace were also excited. They knew that they represented the bottom line and barriers of the entire universe. If even they fell, then the universe wouldn't be far from falling. They had no choice. No matter what world they came from, no matter what race they came from, they were all comrades on the same front. If even they were defeated, then the fall of the universe was only a matter of time. Their families would also become slaves of the celestial race again. There was no way to resist. With the previous experiences, the celestial race would definitely be more vigilant. Their rule would also be more cruel. They wouldn't give them any chance. Therefore, they had no choice. They would rather die in the battle in the Divine Palace than become slaves of the celestial race. But many people were still looking forward to the celestial race having an emperor. Even the Divine Palace had an emperor. It was none other than the world-famous Emperor Emo. In reality, after the martial emperor left for the path of creation, the entire Divine Palace had entered the era of Emperor Mo, had replaced the martial emperor and become the spiritual pillar of the entire Divine Palace. However, the last time he went to the sealed area, Emperor Mo had been ambushed by the emperors of the celestial race and suffered serious injuries. After he returned, he had always been in closed-door training. Therefore, no one knew how he was doing. There was even a rumor circulating in the Divine Palace army that Emperor Emo had been so seriously injured that he probably wouldn't be able to fight again. It was unknown how many tens of thousands of years it would take for him to recover. Originally, the Divine Palace had always been dismissive of such news. They didn't believe it at all. However, in this intense battle, even the Celestial Race Army had attacked several times and defeated several batches of the Divine Palace Army. Yet, Emperor Emo was still nowhere to be seen. No one knew whether he was still in closed-door training in the depths of the Divine Palace. This was a huge blow to the Divine Palace Army, who had always been looking forward to Emperor Mo's attack. Their morale was greatly reduced. The intense battle continued to heat up. The iron hooves of both sides clashed fiercely with the elites of both sides. At every moment, there were people being smashed into meat paste. War beasts were killed one after another, and war fortresses were blown apart. One after another, top-notch experts fell in such a battle. Normally, in their respective worlds, they were existences who could summon the wind and summon the rain with just a single call. However, in this place they were like cannon fodder. They died just like that, and no one cared about them. This was because at every moment there were hundreds and thousands of such experts falling. There were casualties on both sides. One could imagine how intense the battle was. The Celestial Race Army had a complete advantage. Their numbers were several times that of the Divine Palace Army. However, the Divine Palace Army was also extremely ferocious. They fought to the death and did not retreat. They guarded the Holy Land in their hearts. Moreover, they also understood that the Divine Palace was besieged. This news would soon spread throughout the universe. The armies of the other emperors' legacies were probably already on their way. No matter what their original relationship was, they were all comrades on the same front line. They couldn't just stand by and watch. Otherwise, once the divine palace was conquered, they would be the next ones to fall. They understood this very well. Therefore, the most important thing for them was to buy time for the armies of the other emperors' legacies to arrive. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the midst of the celestial race's army. It was a monarch dressed in a royal robe. He held a long spear in his hand and grew larger and larger. Very quickly, he grew to a height of 10 million jong. He was like a gigantic star standing tall in the universe. Just by standing there, he exerted an enormous pressure on the entire divine court. The celestial emperor is finally going to take action. Many people in the divine palace understood that the celestial emperor's last bit of patience had been exhausted. He planned to personally attack the divine palace. Different from the previous small skirmishes, this time he was going to personally destroy all the defenses of the divine palace. Boom! The long spear in the celestial emperor's hand suddenly swung out like a dragon rising from the sea. It directly pointed at the divine palace. It seemed to have locked onto Emperor Amo, who was in seclusion in the divine palace. He wanted to kill him at once.